Okay, welcome back everybody to the afternoon after lunch session. I hope it's not too sleepy for you after a heavy lunch, right? But I'm sure that the next panel discussion will make you awake if you feel sleepy. Okay, so without further ado, let me welcome the moderator for this panel, and he will introduce his panelists. So, client lead of Zoka, Mr. Patrick Wong.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. I'm Patrick. Thanks for joining us. Given that we are running a little bit short of time, I'll speed it up a little bit. Let me introduce my panel of speakers in terms of particular order, right? So let's start with Ambush. All right, Ambush, please come. All right, Ambush has more than 19 years of experience with AstraZeneca, and he has global exposure in digital transformation and healthcare, right? So later on, we'll also ask him different questions for him to share about his leadership experience, not just with AstraZeneca, but over in Amazon, Abbott, Medtronic, Sanofi, many more. All right. Next, I want to welcome Charles from Boston Scientific. All right. Charles is a IT director, and he was one of the co-founders of the Center of Excellence for Digital Tech Strategy as well. Thanks. All right, Julian from Roche Diagnostics. Yeah, thanks for joining us. You know, one interesting fact about Julian is that he has more than 36 years of experience with 10 years as a practicing doctor. Yeah, right. And Martin. So Martin is the co-founder and CEO of Tier Health. All right. And he developed a MedClarity, an AI-powered cardiac CT analysis platform. And actually, he has a booth here in the innovation zone as well. So later, when you have the time, please drop by. And last but not least, Mukesh from A-Star. Well, we need all the different players, right? Not just from the public and the private sector, but someone who looks after the national level type of population data and so on. Thank you. Right. Okay. So as Jim mentioned earlier on, the question is AI, friend, foe, or frenemy? Yeah. I'm not going to answer the question. The panelists here will answer the question for you. But before AI can be anything, right? You actually need the data, right? Yeah. And the thing about, we heard from this morning session as well, data actually is the ultimate frenemy, right? Because data is so priceless and it's so fiercely guarded. Yeah. So maybe my first question is to Mukesh, since from your vantage point at A-Star, you see the things at the national level. You see the challenges that you face, and you know that there are data silos between different institutions. Yeah. And those are the biggest foe when it comes to AI, right? Yeah. So what are the incentive mechanisms or the governance structure that you need to put in place in order to turn data sharing into something that becomes a kind of a necessary frenemy, so to speak? Yeah. Something that probably the players here, the institutions, the partners will in a way have to participate in. Maybe you can elaborate more on that, Mukesh.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, like Patrick said, I think data is a new oil, right? We all know that data is essential for training our AI models and having the best state-of-the-art models. Well, we know that there are challenges in terms of accessing data, especially some of the more sensitive patient data, right? Trust, for example, I put in place some mechanisms in how these data sets can be accessed. So I think broadly is about enabling the ecosystem with having access to these data sets. And when you do that, how do you do that in a manner that will let people know that the data sets are safe and the people get attributed? I think at the heart of it, there's a lot of attribution issues. We do see that. We hear that a lot as well. People have concerns about, oh, if my data is put in that platform, how will it be used? Who will get credited? Things like that. So I think a lot of times is the governance layer, assuring people that their data is safe and that it has the right governance layers to protect it and attribute the right players who are contributing the data as well.
Right. So yeah, I think in terms of data attribution, and definitely that's one particular area, especially A-Star as an agency, right? You get to shape a lot of that initiative and policies. Right. Maybe next question probably to Martin. Yeah. So Martin, as a health tech founder, kind of a serial founder, can I say? Yeah. You need that data, right? Yeah. And in order to build an AI company from public research, in a way you live in that frenemy world where you need that data. How do you navigate that tension, yeah, between the academic need for open science and but the need to commercialize it as well, right? In order to, well, in one way you want to develop your own proprietary IP to be successful and thrive.
I think this is a quite challenging question. Without science, we won't be have a company because we are one of from Health, NUH, Dandoxens, the science projects. But when we have the data, we spun off, we have the data, how we can benefit back to the science. Actually, most of the time, we can find a win-win situation. I give a very real examples. We are doing the AI for cardiac scans. When the patient done the scan, we'll give a percentile. That means based on your score, what kind of risk factors percent in your this age. But the reference, currently most of the hospital using reference created in US nearly 20 years ago, and based on mostly Western people cohorts. So we are building a more local cohort targeted to Asian cohorts. So I think that kind of reference may help in a lot, and we also share this kind of percentile to the science so that everyone can use, not just us. I think that's one of the examples data can be a very friendly way on commercial and benefit to the science.
Right. Thanks for that. Maybe let's take it one step further, right? You know, Julian, you work a lot with the hospitals, obviously, with Roche Diagnostics, and you also work with a lot of customers in the hospital sector where they wish to analyze a lot of the data. How do you manage that dynamics inside the hospital where the lab wants efficiency, right, leveraging AI and so on, but the clinician actually wants transparency, explainability, as was highlighted earlier this morning, right? Because without that, it's like a black box, right? How do you manage all those things?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I think for us in Roche Diagnostics, like you pointed out, laboratory diagnostics, doing the tests, the samples, pathology, tumor samples is one aspect. What we do in that space is really helping our customers do throughput and efficiency and minimizing the amount of duplications or failure of tests. So from that point of view, a lot of that is machine learning. On the clinician side, as per my other colleagues here on this panel, we're a very highly regulated industry. So much of what we put into the industry has to be approved by your HSA, your TGA, your MFDS. So from that perspective, much of what we do with those results, much of that clinical insight we give to the doctors, much of actually the technologies and the offerings we give to remote patient monitoring at home, all of that has to be approved by the regulator. And in order to do that, the data that we use for that is not the ones that we do at the hospital, but we have to do the clinical trials, the evidence base, not only in the country that maybe we develop that technology, but every country we go to where we wish to deploy that country may require for that regulation, that product to be regulatory approved. We often work with our customers, key opinion leaders, to actually develop data sets that allow us to prove that, take it to the regulator, demonstrate that it works, and then that addresses the clinical aspect of, is this a black box, or can I have confidence that you've taken this through our country's regulators and proven that this works? So that's the position that we're in, is that we will work with the clinicians, we'll work the academic centers to get the evidence to prove that this works in their space.
Right. So maybe a follow-up question there, right, Julian? So you mentioned about that regulatory hurdle that you have to go through. So typically in that kind of space, right, what do you see as the potential opportunity there in terms of the ecosystem collaborators here? How can they actually help you to expedite that whole process itself? It's not in my scripted question, so hopefully you can take that.
Great question. Thank you for that. So as Roche, we in the diagnostic space, we actually collaborate with many people in the ecosystem, whether that's in innovation for bioassays, for future bioassays, or in the digital space with machine learning, AI, or even large language models. Part of our remit there with our partners is understanding where their starting point is, whether they're a commercial entity, whether they're an academic medical center, maybe it's actually even A-star, for example, here in Singapore. Part of the work that we will do with them is to understand where their starting point is, the gap between what they start with and the due diligence, and then how that might be taken to a regulator. For us, we have a very industrial and well and tested regulatory approval mechanism. And that's how we in each individual country can make sure we understand what those do. Now to the audience that maybe want to kind of understand how do we collaborate or partner with Roche, first thing would be, is the product or offering that you have something that actually addresses a significant clinical need, a disease, a condition, or rare disease, or something else that actually it's novel, no one else has done it before. And then it's a case of getting in contact, and then we'll assess that together.
Thank you. All right. So, just now we talked a lot about data sharing. Yeah. Let's move on a little bit into the core of the actual problem here when we talk about AI. In all of this, the main thing when it comes to AI, whether it's going to be the foe, the friend, or the frenemy, is actually the human element, right? Having the perfect data or even having brilliant algorithms. What happens when this friend, this AI friend or this AI foe actually meets the sales representative or the patient or the physician? Yeah. So next question to you, Charles. Right. You come from a very competitive medtech space. Yeah. And I understand that you also do a lot of work where you embed AI into digital solutions that you use to empower your sales representatives. But that basically amplifies the risk, right? So now with assuming, I'm just saying, assuming that your AI algorithm comes out with a negative outcome due to bias or hallucination and so on, how do you manage the ambiguity of liability? Do you blame the sales rep or is it the platform? So does this change AI to become your legal foe then?
Well, I think that's a very important question, and that kept me awake at the night for the past 2 years. And I think it's going to continue to keep me awake in the next 2 years as well. So I think in the medtech industry or even healthcare industry, when you try to introduce AI into the digital solutions, servicing our sales rep and physician, I think we are not dealing only with the technology. We are actually dealing with the people, and then we are dealing with the responsibility and outcome. Basically, that's a tricky point that we consider. Technology by now is quite mature, okay? And I think, what do I want to say is that overall, when we go into the technology, we are looking at, actually, it's a very good question. Okay, let me put it this way. So when we design the technology, we need to define very clearly exactly what the AI is going to service. For example, okay, we need to involve our legal and compliance and business people. That's at the beginning starting point. Okay, and so that it's not building the technology, but it's building the trust. Everybody knows that exactly what AI is doing, and actually more important, what AI doesn't do. Because if AI do something that it doesn't do, then that becomes important. And that becomes the fault that you're talking about, right? Second thing is that I want to make it very clear is that in our AI, we do not replace the clinical decision making. That's very important because AI here is nothing but we are providing the better insight to help our physician to make the faster and more efficient decision. Because the aim is that when physician making decision, it normally will take a long time, such as reading the ultrasound. Okay, that will take some time. But if we can help them to make decision faster, then the operation hour will be shorter. The risk that patient is having is shorter as well. Okay, but the key over here is that we are not putting the decision making by the AI. AI is not making decision for doctors and not making decision for patient. It's just supporting role. So I use the analogy like it's a GPS that you are using in the car, right? GPS will tell you the direction, tell the destiny, but ultimately the driver is responsible for that. And this is very similar to our sales rep in the industry as well. They are there not to make the medical advice. They are not a medical advisor. They are there to provide the right information and solution to the physician that we have. Right. So long story short, when we put the AI there, if AI is being misused, okay, or misunderstood, that becomes a problem. Okay, and that becomes the risk that we are doing. And therefore, we need to be constantly asking ourselves, saying what should be the right thing to do, what should be the right compliance we need to follow, so that we can get the exciting AI solution, but lower the risk. Okay, ultimately, we want to use AI to drive the physician better education, and then they can treat the patient better for the better patient outcome. I think that's what our industry is looking for. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Charles. Right. And moving on to Ambush, right? I guess in pharma, you face a very similar kind of commercial hurdle, right? Especially when you leverage AI solutions. You might have AI friends, so-called, that powers your similar digital health solutions. And like what Charles mentioned, well, the idea is to help you to increase the scale and the speed of your development, right? Yeah, but when you try to actually get your digital health solutions adopted in the market, what kind of challenges do you actually face?
Right, that's a good question, right? But I would want us to take a step back and understand, answer a larger question, right? Where is AI being utilized in the pharma world, right? So essentially 4 applications to it. Employee productivity, Gen AIs of the world, we all know about it, right? Have an enterprise version of GPT, co-pilots of the world, that's one. Sales rep productivity. I speak about it separate from the employee because sales reps are the most precious commodity of ours, right? Third one, diagnostics, pre-screening, early screening, right? 2 parts to it. One is in-clinic diagnostics, what you can do within the existing set, and one is in laboratory diagnostics, which likes of Roche Diagnostics power. So there is a role for AI there as well. And the last one is AI in R&D, where you talk about AI being able to work through data sets and potentially come up with new molecules, new therapies, et cetera, right? I would address the, except the R&D piece, I can address everything else because I represent the commercial arm. So now zooming back, right? The question is always, what is the right level of risk, awareness or averseness, right? In technology, the classic saying is, I will say sorry rather than ask for permission, right? Now, think of that and think of how we operate in healthcare. Exactly the opposite, right? We deal in lives, patients' health, and we cannot have that situation. However, what also remains to be true, right? That the existing processes, either complemented by the current set of technology, people are as prone to issues as is AI, right? So then we talk about the concept of human in the loop, which is any input you give needs to be validated by a human, and any output which is then sent to, let's say, the end consumers, the patients, or the HCPs needs to be validated as well, right? With that, I think there is a broad equivalence you can get in terms of AI or technology risk awareness or aversion, right? The second piece of it, right, how this manifests in decision making is, especially in countries, right, which are further along in their journey of being AI aware, data aware, is a lack of, moving forward. For example, right, there's a joke in Singapore, we have more pilots going on in the healthcare space than we have pilots in SIA, right? We have pilots, but very less of them actually get implemented. As opposed to, very recently, AstraZeneca Thailand has been working with the government there, and they have within their standard of care included AI chest X-rays for detection of lung nodules, right? So that has already happened. So the wake-up call here is probably towards, developed economies, developed systems, which are, which are stuck in a loop because of the risk aversion and not taking the decision. Right. The third aspect of how this works out is what can clinicians do, right? So typically, the way we think about it is that healthcare companies own the data and we are the ones who will make it available. That's not the case. We only get the data for a specific period of time, for specific attributes, for specific results. And when that is done, the data is no longer with us, right? So the onus falls back on hospitals, clinicians to make this work. Perhaps the final one, and I know I'm giving a very long answer, is when you do innovation, eventually who pays for it? Is it the patients? Is it the insurance systems? Is it the government? What is it, right? We have also not figured out a model on that, because even though, let's say, a lung X-ray AI solution like Cure shows 96% accuracy rates, we are still stuck on that 4% not working, which is far better than, let's say, a radiologist, just working without a solution. So I hope that gives a comprehensive, view to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'll stay on with you, Ambush, afterwards. Yeah. So, we've kind of covered the data foundation, the integration into so-called the market itself, right? Let's take it, like what you say, from the helicopter view, 30,000 feet above, right? Yeah. I think this is where the frenemy dynamics really truly comes alive, right? Like what you say, in the marketplace itself. Yeah. So from a market dynamics perspective, you kind of have given that answer already. Yeah, you say big pharma often partners with AI startups, probably like players like Martin's, Tia Health, and so on. Yeah, that's the classic enemy relationship. Yeah. So how does global leaders like AstraZeneca ensure that the partnership is truly collaborative rather than becoming a foe where you dictate the terms, you control the data, and basically you decide how to run the commercials?
Right. So I think I've touched upon the data aspect of it, which is very clearly the data ownership does not, unlike the belief, it does not really lie with the companies in question, right? Now the second piece of it, which sort of covers it all, is the partnership model we go for, right? So what's in it for us? Let's start there, right? So AstraZeneca, years ago, we realized that if we are to make the kind of change we want in the health of patients, we need to not only work on therapies, we need to sort of empower the ecosystem as well. How does the ecosystem get empowered? Ecosystem gets empowered where standard of care, standard of diagnostics is well defined, which it is. However, the threshold of pre-screening, the accessibility, the cost is lower, right? And a few years ago, we realized that AI, although Gen AI was not the name of the game there, but AI could help it, right? So we consciously came up with this concept where we would scout for and partner with uh, AI companies, typically in the diagnostics pre-screening space. And the key word here is we'll partner with them, but we do not take a stake in them. We do not typically own the IP unless the IP leads to, let's say, a drug discovery or something. That's a different question. We do not own the IP. We ensure that we use our goodwill with the healthcare partners, right? With governments, with private and public healthcare players, and we connect these scale-ups or startups to those systems. Further to that, if we ascertain then they are who they say they are, which is essentially AI governance, all the checks and balances once they are done, we would then go to the extent of funding certain studies to figure out the efficacy of their solutions, right? I'll fall back on Cure, right? Cure AI was a relatively unknown startup about 4 or 5 years ago. And in April this year, they did 5 million lung scans, lung X-ray scans using their AI technology, right? It doesn't stop there. Now they're working towards detection of tuberculosis, COPD, so on and so forth, right? Our intent is not to stifle growth, but empower them, because a lot of times these startups do not have the kind of relationships an old school pharma company would. So that's the entirety of how we work with them. So I don't really see a frenemy sort of relationship. I see a very complementary role, right? Because we are not in diagnostic space, right? But we are in the space of making patients better, curing patients, right? The earlier detection there is, the earlier staging we get the patient at, we can be sure of better outcomes. So we look at it from that perspective, and that's working out well for us.
Thank you. Right. So I can see Martin shifting a little bit in his his seat, right? So maybe I'll give the next question to Martin, right? With what Ambush say in terms of how they encourage the partnership and make things happen in the commercial world, what's your opinion on that, right? That's my first question. And my second question to you, Martin, is what do you think is the biggest foe that can potentially threaten to, kill your promising startup?
Another challenge questions. Yes, I think for when I was starting an entrepreneurship journey, I'm quite scared of giant companies. They took over your business. And after I co-found a company with few thousand of employees, I know how much limitations a big company has. There's a lot limitation than a startup to entering of different directions and use of resource. So I think we should not, as a startup, we should not afraid of key players in the market. Actually, the use of resource internally within them, maybe it's more expensive than getting a resource from outside. And there's a lot of limitations within that. And yet to be a good partner with a company like that, to be very helpful for both parties, frankly speaking, because they can't be diverse their focus in the mainstream of business. So with the partnership with a startup, smaller company who complementary each other, actually it's a much a win-win situation. I think there's provide the best value for both parties rather than just eat you out on your directions. Because all the internal existing resource routine in the big company, actually there's already have momentums in the marketing in many of directions. To turn their momentum in any of other direction will be like huge cost and huge risk as well. So I think that as a startup, the most important is that to really assure the value of your new startup and whether you are really have real value. If you have real value and find out more bigger player as a partner will be the best form of to grow the business. For example, like us, we always partner with the top trained hospitals, famous hospitals, and of the top of funds managers or of the figures of the retailer or these distributors. And we also open up our software for them to trial. And also we are setting the challenge on their data set, bring over and take all kinds of analysis. So I think that's because you are very confident on the value you have and partner with bigger player and have a much bigger platform for start to grow. That's my view. Thanks.
Thank you. Right. So my next question is to both Charles and Julian, right? Maybe you all can take it one after the other. Yeah. So, understanding the relationship here, yeah, it's not just about large established big pharma or medtech companies and so on, right? I'm sure there are internal challenges, right, that you need to manage within your organization, right? So when you have a new innovative AI-driven solution, yeah, whether it's for your sales reps or for your diagnostic tools and so on, how do you manage that competition for resources, yeah, for market share, without so-called affecting your legacy solutions and products?
So probably I can go first is that I don't think that in our company, okay, or Boston Scientific, we will have major challenge in terms of innovation through the AI. So we did apply AI in some of the product in the market, and that did help us to gain the market share much more. Our biggest challenge is really at how do we know that the AI we invest, they come back with the value? Okay, and just now I also talked about what is the legal compliance, okay, over there. So we spend a lot of time actually on the organization change. Okay, that is from internal perspective, how to work with AI, right? So basically you need to go with education, sympathy, and also the embassy over there. So that takes some time. On top of that, actually we introduced a new AI into our product and we launched it last year as well. And that is where, how can we educate our physician work with AI as well? So we have several kind of physicians that one of them say, okay, AI doesn't know better than me. I know better. But again, just now I commented, AI is not here to make the decision for you. It's like a GPS. You may know the route, but it tells you what is the upcoming, what is the so-called road condition there. So same thing when we put the needle into the body in the medical device, anything can happen. Some of the blockages happen there, and how do you deal with it? And watch out. So that helps physician to make the decision much faster, okay, and reduce the risk of the operation. Some physicians still saying, okay, I will know better, how do I do it? But for the younger physician, their acceptance become faster, okay, because they're in the learning. So how do we balance that become important, right? So that's why in pharma world, probably we look at that, how can we gain the market share? For the medical device world, we focus more on how can we educate physicians so that they can treatment better. So the angle comes in a bit different. But the more we can educate physicians to use AI with us, our product, surely I think market share will come in. So that's where we are driving that option.
Julian?
Maybe I'll approach this from a different direction. I mean, ultimately, our customers, labs, clinicians, patients at home, they face all the same challenges in this region as in the rest of the world in terms of chronic diseases, physician shortages and staff burnout, and then the demand for precision medicine. So from that point of view, much of what we do in Roche, both diagnostics and also from the pharmaceuticals side of the business, is how do we help those customers with the burden on them currently, tools that we provide from a diagnostics perspective, which are ultimately laboratory tests. How can we help them with reviewing those, augmenting and optimizing the review of those in terms of speeding up the time to diagnosis, speeding up the time to treatment, speeding up hopefully clinical outcomes and improving clinical outcomes. So for us in Roche, even though we're an almost 130-year-old company, our intent is by 2030, we want to be one of the leading digital life sciences companies in the world. And part of that is within our own organizations, putting into place education around the benefits of AI and digital technologies, helping craft what those value benefits to the physicians are, both in terms of time saving, focusing their efforts on what the patients to look out for, which tests are available and which are the most accurate, what is the next kind of etiology in the precision medicine space, genomics, sequencing, as a means of then giving the customers the best tools, whether it's the provider, the laboratory, or the patient, that then gives them the shortest route to interpreting the result and then taking the next step of action. So for us, with the AI journey, our own organization actually embracing it. It's a journey. We do take some of the tools around workflow efficiency internally, but we're also changing the dynamics with our customers and talking about, we already know you are doing stuff in AI. How can we better support you on that journey? What tools are you looking for? So we're not the pioneers. We're just fast followers. Our customers are the ones that are demanding what they want from us. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Right. Maybe now come back to Mukesh, right? Yeah. So you have heard from the different speakers here about the commercial, the clinical, the startup challenges, right? So again, from the national level, from A-Star's perspective, I understand that you also explore new technology like leveraging Gen AI to create synthetic data. Yeah. And do you think this will become the ultimate friend that will actually solve the data sharing problem that you talked about earlier on? Yeah. And, it will address all the privacy concerns. Yeah. That's my first question. My second question is that, and do you think will that actually improve the collaboration here with the different players, or will it actually threaten all principles of data validation, the data stewardships, that I'm sure is very important from your perspective?
Thanks, Patrick. I liked how Martin said about the value that a startup brings, right, to the ecosystem. I think that's very important. For A-Star, we are working with partners in the ecosystem locally and globally. And an example I can give is DataCibo. It's actually a US startup. We work with them on synthetic data generation. So they've got AI algorithms that are open sourced, and we use these algorithms to actually generate synthetic data. And right now we are doing evaluations with that synthetic data to see how close they can come to a real data when it comes to LLM training or ML training. So we see the values of startup and how they can enable the ecosystem. And as always, right, I think we will come together, right, whether it's startup or the big techs, to actually enable such technologies. And ultimately, I think it's a joint solution that we are working towards, right? Another example will be OpenAI. We've also been working with OpenAI on some of the LLM benchmarking. And we do see that there's a value again, right? We do this benchmarking, we put it into the public domain, whether it's a paper or a white paper. And ultimately, it helps, again, the general ecosystem to know, okay, for this particular task, this model is good for that. So I'll go for this model. So I think that's a very strong effect when you put all of these technologies from the ecosystem together. And the part about synthetic data, it's one of the technology, I'll say, is a starting point. There are other technologies as well, like confidential compute, right, and encryptions. We talked about also, secure sandboxes where there are even blockchain technologies that enable some of these privacy preserving tools. I was just having some conversations earlier, and they are in the startup phase, in the initial phase. They're not yet fully fledged solutions. So I think there's also an angle of education about these technologies, broader level, to know what these systems are capable of and where there are limitations. They are not perfect. For synthetic data, for example, we saw that there could be still a gap of about 10% when it comes to LLM accuracy when you train with synthetic data. So it's not entirely representative. You will still see some level of shift in terms of statistics, right? But what level can you tolerate them? Am I okay to deal with slight shifts and still retain the overall statistical probability good enough for first level cut? In fact, that could be a way to reduce your data governance or the sort of strictness, right, in terms of accessing data. Synthetic data could be a first level cut, right? I sort of use that data to explore a bit, and I'm confident with the results. Then I ask for the real data, and then that perhaps goes through a more stricter governance. But so we see that as a way to enable data access and sharing with synthetic data. But ultimately, you need validation, right? How much can I trust? And I think there needs to be more work done there broadly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe I add on. Actually, we work very closely with A-Star, various departments like BII, I Square, yeah, DST. So we have frequent communication with the scientists in A-Star, and there's a huge of data has been accumulated along the years, and there's a lot of outputs. Yeah. So this output may not really need a data, but they can benefit the staff like us because already train the model, train the matrix, train the whatever. So it's like I think the way to share, because when your project come out, we also bring in new data to the pool. So it's a beneficial win-win situation between the staff and the A-Star. Thanks.
Thanks, Martin and Mukesh. Right. Do we still have time? Okay. Probably not. Okay. But thanks for all the panelists, right, for your sharings in your insights into the challenges as well as the opportunities. Yeah. So, you know, as you have heard from the panelists here, right, AI is not just a simple friend or a foe or a frenemy, right? Yeah. And I think Charles and a number of you also mentioned, we cannot just rely on the technology alone, right? Because ultimately, there's the human in the loop, right? Which is very important as a safeguard in terms of how we do all this. And earlier on, I also heard about the need to have empathy, right? Because at the end, the benefit is for the patient, yeah. And so, of course, there's still a lot of work to be done. Yeah, we heard about the different challenges in terms of getting data sharing, you know, and as Mukesh mentioned about synthetic data being now just the first layer. And, you know, there's a lot of pilots going on as well, right? And I'm sure all this will continue, yeah. So I guess to conclude, right, AI for sure is here to stay. Yeah, it's about how we manage the different speed of a startup versus the big players, right? How we can bring everyone together in a really truly ecosystem way of working. Yeah, and it's about the open research that A-Star is working on versus things to manage the privacy risk. Yeah, so I think I hope that all of you got some nuggets of wisdom from our panelists here. And with that, I would like to just wrap up. And thank you to all the panelists again. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. Right. So just one last thing before we walk off the stage. I think as leaders here that you see here, you know, it's important to continue to have such difficult conversations. Sometimes we just keep a lot of things to ourselves, yeah. But it's important to get all the players here, yeah, to exchange ideas so that we can continue our collaboration. Thank you very much. And once again, thanks to all the panelists.
Okay, thank you, Patrick and panel one panelists. So I'm sure AI is not an over-spoken topic yet, hearing from all the panelists just now. So now let's move on quickly to panel two, which is again very interesting because many pharma and medtech companies tell me it's very interesting topic to discuss about. So let's welcome panel two moderator, Director of Health Ecosystem from Zoka, Aparna.
Thank you, Jim. Hello, everybody. I know this is a post-lunch session, so we're going to have a pretty rousing session. I would say there's going to be some controversial discussions as we go into panel two. So I'm going to be talking with this panel discussing about products to outcomes. Who pays and who gains? So for first panelist, I'd like to invite up all the panelists to stage. Dr. Wei Yang Chung, Vice Provost, Singapore Management University, and Senior Advisor Health Economics from Ministry of Health, Singapore, please. He's played an integral role in numerous key health initiatives as deploying technology, development of policies, in especially the Healthier SG. And I think he really needs no introduction because we've seen his keynote address and a lot of his achievements. Next up, I'd like to invite Joachim Jorger Ramos, Area Leader, APAC Digital Health Solutions, Customer Delivery, Abbott Labs. He's also the co-chair of APAC Med's Health Data Committee, where he champions interoperability in healthcare data systems. So I think that's going to be an interesting perspective as well. We now have one more person from the medtech industry, Priyanta De Silva, but he's given me liberty to call him Pri. So I'm going to take that, Pri. Associate Director, Digital Marketing, APAC, Boston Scientific. And he leads commercial marketing transformation programs that harness AI, data, and omnichannel engagement. Dr. Ronan Kelly, next up, Vice President Medical, Eli Lilly and Company, leading the Lilly Center of Clinical Pharmacology in Singapore, and that now includes a special group focusing on digital health technologies. So that's an interesting perspective that we're going to tap into. And last but definitely not the least, and many of you know her here, Ying Yo, General Manager, Roche Pharmaceuticals, also the Vice President of SAPI, Singapore Association of Pharmaceutical Industries, and leads its Research and Development Committee as well. Welcome to all our esteemed panelists. All right, so I'm just going to set the stage a little bit. The first panel, heavy duty AI, deep core tech stuff, and a lot of, I think, key words have been thrown around since the morning till now. There was a lot of value, a lot of outcome, who's going to pay, and I'm glad Ambuj said that earlier on, that okay, eventually who's going to pay. This panel is going to be talking more about the business end of things. So they're going to be talking more about, how do we get these technologies, AI, new age development, all of this, but who's going to actually pay for them? And how does that work in our healthcare ecosystem? So the typical job for this esteemed panel now is moving from selling products to outcomes. There's measurement required. Measurement is quite complex. It is possible with all the new age technologies, but we're going to debate two main questions. That's number one. Where are we in the value-based healthcare journey, not only Singapore, but over the region? That's one. What are the challenges so far, despite all the technology that we have? So we're going to do one round with that. The second round is going to be about looking at, okay, now that we have this technology, AI and everything that's come up between the last few years, from the last health ecosystem day to now, new stuff is coming in day in and day out. How can that actually bridge us forward to go and realize a little bit more about what value-based care brings to the promise of that to us? All right, so I'm just going to pull this. Okay. And so I'm going to start with Ying, actually. I wanted to ask you, we spoke earlier about in the preparation for this, and I think one of the questions that also came out is, we've tried this for some time, and there's been a lot of solutions that are out there, not just from pharma and medical devices, etc. But eventually, it's who's going to pay for it. And one of the previous panelists also did mention that. And I think first comes to, they were talking about value. So my first question to you, when we talk about outcome-based, value-based healthcare, it's not new. It's been there along. So who defines value? What defines value? And also, what have you seen that brings different stakeholders, from payers to startups in the ecosystem, et cetera, and pharma together to align on this value?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I must say, Jim, today the session has grown from where we were last year. So welcome, everybody. Yeah, the size have grown. I would say, during our discussion, we touched about this, right? I mean, Parma was asking me about outcome-based agreement. And this, for those who have been in the industry for a while, is not a new concept. I think many have tried it. Many countries have also tried it. We have also tried from a pharma perspective, having agreements with countries, for example, where you cap certain payment and you guaranteed purchases, or you have tried based on milestones. Generally, it's number one, it's quite complex, something that hopefully with AI, etc. now you could actually simplify it. But I personally find that the fundamental challenge to any outcomes agreement is the agreement on the value itself. I think healthcare has evolved for a very long time, right? I've joined the industry as an oncology sales rep quite a while ago. And the outlook of oncology at that time are very different, right? Basically, what we are looking at is really survival. And it's about whether the drug really will be able to change a survival extension for patients. And fast forward to today, we have come a really long way. For those who still feels that cancer is a death sentence, I think you're stuck in a reality 50 years ago, right? It has changed so much. It's, yes, in some disease area more than the other, I can say, rolling his eye, there's still way to go. But in a lot of key disease area, I think we have changed the landscape so much. But we have not changed our health technology assessment at all. We have not changed the value recognition of how do we actually look at treatment. And this is where I feel the biggest misalignment is to ensure there is any scalability and adaptability of new innovation into the system. And I look into just oncology, right? Like so many years later, we are still looking at OS and questioning whether PFS is a good proxy for OS. But we have moved to beyond, right? I see somebody laugh in the audience because it's a real question. And my question is that how do we redefine value and value for who? And I think that's the most important question that we at least needs to come to some basic element of alignment before we can actually move forward and say, I think the fundamental thing is that can we at least align on what is the value recognition for new innovations that actually comes out in the market? Because we're not here in this society right now still looking at whether we survive or not. Quality of life is very important in the era where, resources, hospital capacity and capability is becoming more expensive. Those are elements that is important to also address. So how do we actually recognize all this to then agree on what kind of outcome do we actually want to put forth together on the table?
Right, absolutely. And just on that, I know I'm just diving back in a little bit. How does that, impact from a pharma company organization point of view, your investments towards, let's say, RWE trials and large scale trials? How would that kind of impact or incentivize or detract even?
So I think we put a lot of emphasis in real world data nowadays, knowing that phase 3 studies can only answer certain type of questions. And to be transparent to not all pharma is not going to do a direct head-to-head studies with every single molecule that is out there. So there is a real gap when it comes to clinical practice, right? Things that you can't answer beyond a phase 3 study. How do you use it in real life setting when you need to sequence it one over the other? How do you actually use it in different countries where your basic care and standard of care are very different? So real world evidence are very important, but recognition of real world evidence, I would say it's a growing field and not an immediately recognized evidence. I mean, if you just look at both in our health authority as well as our ACE submission recognition for real world evidence, it's something that falls into the bottom of kind of like nice to have. I would say there's a growing recognition because there is growing evidence. I hope that one day we will actually start to recognize those evidence more because it's the one that is most reflective of what is happening in the real world, right? And in Singapore, I think we are quite privileged. We sit on quite a lot of data. A lot of health system hospitals are really very good in capturing data, and we are moving into a centralized EMR system. I think that will really unlock a lot of capability to be able to really use those to create real world evidence for us in this local ecosystem. And when that is available, I do hope that we will have policymakers, clinicians who will really adopt that to actually inform a real utility in our healthcare ecosystem.
Absolutely. And that's actually where I'd like to bring you in, Wei Yang, is now, okay, as obviously as a payer, policy maker, I definitely want to get your point of view, and I'm sure the audience wants to hear that as well. So Singapore, we sit on a lot of data, and I think definitely in the region, I think Singapore is one of the kind of flagship or flag bearers for the rest of the market as well. So when it comes to bringing together all this data, looking at moving towards more value-based healthcare, but more specifically, let's say, outcomes-based pricing or risk-sharing agreements. Two questions to you. One is that, do you also agree that there is this alignment issue, or how much have we progressed, let's say, for towards alignment, and where do you think is the hurdle still, if anything, to be crossed? And based on the available kind of progress that we have made, the data systems and policies that we have made, how do you see this going forward? Where do you see is value-based healthcare the next 3 to 5 years? How is it going to change in Singapore?
Yeah, I have to caveat, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Ministry of Health. But I think the real issue for me that probably existed and still maybe exists a little bit today is the issue of trust. Do the payers trust that the pharma companies come in really with the intention that's aligned? I think I mentioned in my first ecosystems of like the speech as well. But that I think is critical. And what pharma companies do when they come to speak to the regulators, to the payers, I think the tone you have, how you go about conducting a conversation, what you say, what you're willing to give up on your side as a company, I think is key to building that trust. Right now, of course, once you have trust and the sense that actually we are aligned in terms of what we're trying to achieve, which is ultimately deploying drugs in places which are cost effective, which are maybe the best clinical outcome that exists, or whichever modality that we are thinking of this particular drug, then you have a way of, in a way, closing the gap. Then I think that the key thing that Ying mentioned, which is how do you measure that value? Are we measuring that value properly? Any attempt by the drug company to tell a government or a payer or insurance company that value is broader than what you see is going to be seen as posturing by the company to make you charge a higher price. Okay, so again, it goes back to that trust level, right? I mean, exactly what are we saying? And of course, if there is really that value that's being created, a third part of the conversation that we might need to then figure out is, then who pays, which is part of what you're trying to say right now. If indeed the guy now lives when he was supposed to die, because if he didn't undergo that treatment, he would have died, does he have a responsibility to pay a substantive part of that treatment? Now, he may not be able to pay upfront, but if indeed he does survive, does he pay maybe a percentage of his income over the period of his lifetime? Those are to me, the difficult conversations that we may need to have in order for us to actually really address the issue of can we really have outcome-based sort of like payments? Who should be paying? It's very inconvenient for the government to tell the people that because you survive, you must now pay. But maybe if there's a way for a pharma company to work out such a payment scheme, which makes it seem far more affordable, then all of a sudden people might say, okay, I will take this because I don't see it burdening my kids. I don't see it burdening my other family members. I think if I really survive, I can earn enough to pay it off, right? But if the government were to say that, everyone say the government's heartless, you're making I pay, he's already sick, you're still making him, bet his life. So we have to understand that there is a range of different constraints that the different parties actually use. The right approach, the right way of assuring that everyone is actually committed to the outcome, right? Which is that actually that the patients live and have a good life, right? And of course, then the quality of life measures then become important as well. Then how do we do that? I mentioned this earlier on as well. Who measures is important, right? If the pharma company is the one measuring it, first of all, you might find it difficult. Second, of course, you also worry about whether the guy actually wants to pay up. If you measure his outcomes as being very positive, maybe he is then forced to pay up. He may then, fake his sort of outcomes. I mean, those are all real concerns, right? But who is the honest arbiter who can actually make that measurement, enforce that measurements, enforce and maybe make sure there's no, fraudulent entries or, fake entries and so on, so that the system as a whole can trust that the outcomes are real and that there is a commitment to pay, and maybe there's someone underwriting even if there's someone reneging, right? And I think those are the pieces that right now don't exist. And of course, compounded with the lack of trust, that makes these conversations very difficult. One of the things that I've noticed when I speak to some of the pharma companies is that when I start talking about outcomes and I start talking about, payments over the 10 years, the time horizons are a little bit too long sometimes for them to contemplate as well. 3 years, maybe 10 years. Are you sure? How do I account to that to my stakeholders? How do I account to my shareholders? And those are also concerns that we may need to have a way of addressing, which is why even as I started to try to talk to people, because I actually chair the Advanced Cell Therapy Research Institute in Singapore as well. So cell therapy is one of those places where really we need to figure out how to pay for this thing, or if not find a solution otherwise. I decided to talk to the banks as well, because I felt that in order for the pharma companies to accept a payment that is going to be phased out, they may need to have something that is an asset that they hold that the bank underwrites, and they can use it to borrow some money in the meantime. And so I feel that there is actually a larger ecosystem that needs to be put in order for such a system to work. And once you have that in place, then you can begin to then say, okay, we may be able to find a solution somewhere between where the farmer takes some risk, the banks maybe take some risk, the insurance takes some risk, the government takes some share, and then the individual himself must also be able to take some share to find, I think, the solution for what we're trying to get to.
Absolutely. I think, and I echo the point about trust, especially because it's about having, that kind of a neutral, glue to bring it all together. Absolutely. I want to tap into one point, what you said about measurement, and I'm going to pass that next on to Joachim. I want to ask you, because measurement, and you mentioned earlier in your talk in the morning as well, it's about the data framework. It's about the diagnostics tests, sharing of the data. So on the diagnostics end, Joachim, we would like to get your point of view, because a lot of the treatment, pharma, medical device, surgery, treatment plans itself depends on the diagnostics, outcomes, and measurements from that. So how do you see that, this integration of the diagnostic, tests, and especially the new age digital metrics, for example, not just the typical clinical endpoints. How do you see the integration of that advancing or helping towards the larger cause of value-based healthcare?
I acknowledge the discussion around the value in that whole topic, but I think it's probably safe to say that the diagnostics will always be a measurement in exemplifying what value truly is. Diagnostics, clinical diagnostics, all forms of diagnostics that contribute to the value-based care play an important role in displaying and representing the patient as a unit, as a whole, as an individuum. And it can play this role, diagnostics can play this role if the data that's flowing into that data pool is standardized and is harmonized, and data pools or data generating systems are communicating with each other. So you were mentioning the digital health record in Singapore. So this is fairly straightforward. Diagnostics, especially when it's connected, helps measuring what outcome is really achieved by whatever methodology. And here I'm not talking about the workflow improvements that digital diagnostics can bring, higher quality, greater standardization of care, greater standardization of patient results, efficiencies in workflows in the laboratory, freeing up resources. So this is not part of this discussion. So it's really about integrating diagnostic data into a data pool that helps us running algorithms that display value. But here's the thing, and I don't know to what degree we all realize that in Singapore, we're living in a bubble. We have electronic health record becoming reality to a large extent. It's not perfect. It's nowhere perfect, but at least we have an agreement in this smart nation that healthcare providers, that diagnostic institutes are combining data for the benefit of the patient. We're in a bubble because when we're looking outside Singapore in this geography, we are far away from that integration of diagnostic healthcare data. Diagnostic data. When we just look across the border to Malaysia, when we look to Indonesia, when we look to the Philippines, there is a clear momentum in these countries to go towards that integrated data pool that represents a patient. But how far are we, how far are they on their journey really to combine data? And that is a challenge when you talk about value-based care today. To what degree can each country in our geography really measure based on diagnostic data? There are other measurements, no question about that, but here we're only talking about the diagnostic data.
And bringing on that measurement point, I think I value first build the trust based on measurements based on what to measure. So I'm coming to you, Dr. Ronan Kelly, because clinical trials is your forte area. What digital biomarkers or endpoints over and above, say, classical endpoints, perhaps in phase 1, phase 2, are kind of ready to, take up the, kind of take the forward step on value-based healthcare? And how do you build these endpoints with an RWE perspective, perhaps?
Well, if we're talking about value-based healthcare, a surefire way of wasting money in healthcare is to give a drug to somebody in whom it's not going to work. I come from a clinical trials background. Another surefire way of wasting money is developing a drug that doesn't work. And a big part of my job is triaging drugs or assessing drugs to see which early phase drugs are more likely to work, which ones are less likely to work. So to go back a step, I spent a long part of my life working on drugs that were fantastic for treating diabetes in rats, but were no good at all in humans. Now, if all humans were the same, if all humans were identical, and if it worked in one human, it would work in all humans. But better or for worse, that's not the case. So I start becoming interested in which humans, which people does this new drug work in? And to your point, getting data on that. So clinical trials are maybe a very long way from where they ought to be. So they are very driven by regulatory endpoints. The phrase phase 3 studies came up just recently. There is typically an endpoint specified by a regulator. It can be overall survival, progression-free survival in cancer. It can be glucose lowering in diabetes. It can be mortality after a heart attack. And phase 3 trials are typically designed to assess that one particular endpoint, because that's how a drug is registered and gets on the market. And for some things, it's relatively simple. Mortality after a heart attack, kind of black and white. But clinical trials, another waste of money is clinical trials are really very large. There are several reasons for that. So a lot of endpoints are rather infrequent. Fortunately, mortality after a heart attack is increasingly infrequent. Other endpoints can be very variable. So some endpoints depend on patient-reported outcomes. Low back pain may be reported as a pain score. State of mind in depression is often rated as a scale of some kind. Dementia, Alzheimer's. Again, there's a lot of variability in the endpoints. There's one extreme example. I was exposed just recently to a study where 6-year-olds were being asked to score their quality of sleep over the last week. Now you can just imagine the variability in that particular endpoint. We'd like to do better on endpoints, better on measuring. Now, as a clinician, I also was brought up to believe in evidence-based medicine. The evidence came from large-scale randomized clinical trials. That was, gold standard medical evidence. So I knew that the drug worked. I often could say how well it worked, on average. But in this particular patient, I had no idea if it was working. And for some drugs, maybe an antihypertensive, I can measure a blood pressure. Even then, we know that a blood pressure in a doctor's office is maybe very different than the blood pressure at home. So can we measure things in a better way? Can we measure things that relate to an individual patient? So we got to precision medicine. Now, precision medicine, oddly enough, often seemed to me to be to identify one specific marker that said, use the drug or don't use the drug. That's not very precise. And we do very much better than that. So what are the valuable endpoints? How to measure value? These questions came up in the last 5 minutes. There are many things we can measure. So I work in the early phase of drug development. I bring drugs into human beings for the first time. I look at small numbers of human beings. Can we measure things better than just survived or didn't survive, or glucose lowers fasting glucose, or postprandial glucose, or average glucose? There are so many potential markers. So imagine a much more complex scenario. This is now the world we're working in. Let's take depression or Alzheimer's. Imagine that each patient has a smartphone which looks at them many times a day and looks at their face, looks at their eye movements and assesses those eye movements, looks at their facial characteristics and assesses those in a way that maybe I don't understand. Maybe that same smartphone assesses the timbre of their voice. It measures their stride length, their balance. Maybe it's linked to a ring on their finger, measures their heart rate, their blood pressure, the variability of that. Maybe that same ring measures their sleep quality. And then maybe in this smartphone or offline, there is an algorithm that integrates all this data. We are now developing that kind of assessment in early clinical trials to see which patients and how well a particular new molecule should move forward. But obviously, the same technology could be applied post-commercialization, could be used to assess in this particular patient, is this drug working, whatever working means. Working depends on what we're assessing, and that's a separate question. But we could at least assess in individual people what effect the drug is having, rather than waiting for a much later endpoint. So I think there are much better measures that can be incorporated, but there's a huge amount of work to do to identify those measures, to validate those measures, and to work with regulators on acceptance of those measures.
Actually, I'm going to pick up on that word, acceptance of the measures. And I'm going to go, since you're at the upstream of the value chain, I'm going to go to Pri at the downstream end of the value chain, where it is you work closely with physicians on a day-to-day basis. So acceptance, one, regulators, policymakers, assuming that happens, and then we're moving from selling products to selling outcomes. Where do you see, or how this acceptance is going to look like for patients, clinicians, in surgeons even, in this sort of value-based healthcare space?
Sure. Just to anchor everyone together on what we do. So Boston Scientific is interventional medical device company. So what does that mean? I'll just share a little bit of a background. So if I'm a physician, if I'm a patient and I have a blocked coronary arteries, in the past, what would have been the only option is a bypass procedure. So what does a bypass procedure mean? Just hands raised. Anyone seen Grey's Anatomy? The show, right? Yeah, it's a lot of blood. They bring in scalpels, they open up the patient's thorax. It's a bloody affair, right? But actually, in reality, these days, that usually doesn't happen. What would happen is you would make a small incision close to where the groin is. The patient is under sedation. You send up some wires. You unblock. You basically do some imaging. You unblock the heart, and then within a week, the patient goes up a flight of stairs, right? So those devices or those equipment that are used by physicians are what companies like Boston Scientific produce. Okay, so it's a good business to be in because it's also one of those businesses in which you are able to show the value of what you're providing. Yeah. So I'll just link it back to your earlier question on the topic: is how can technology help drive some of that value? And the way we would look at technology is especially AI, is we look at tuck in AI in product and transformational AI within the company, right? So what do we mean by tuck in AI? So one of the products that we build is a pacemakers. Everyone knows what pacemakers are, right? And where AI adds value is because you have exposure to a lot more diagnostics using the pacemaker than you would have in your, say, your smartwatch or your phone. We are able to basically determine 45 days in advance for a patient who would have a cardiac event. So it's old school AI, but it has a lot of value because for the healthcare system, if you know 45 days in advance of a patient having a cardiac event, you can intervene, right? So in that scenario, showing value is more black and white. Yeah. In the second area, just coming back to the example with regards to unblocking the coronary vessels in the heart. Just imagine a second, right? We can't really see what's going on, right? You're sending wires into the heart, but might not necessarily know the nature of the block, how calcified it is, the lesion is, you just don't know. So we have imaging solutions. And what we're seeing, especially in this part of the world, is the exposure to physician education may not necessarily be as high as in Europe or in the US. So when we are educating physicians on using these diagnostics tools, it's actually quite a high burden for us. So I think we heard in panel one, leveraging AI to speed up some of the diagnosis. This is what we do as well. It's basically a guidance system called IVUS, intravascular ultrasound, in which we basically leverage AI to set up what the diagnosis should be, provide the recommendation to the physician, and the physician just takes it on from there. So by doing this, we're able to reduce time by about 62% in an average procedure. But what it does is, if you leverage guidance while you're doing the treatment of the patient, you're able to reduce adverse outcomes by as much as 50%. So it's one of those ways in which we do not have to go straight into an LLM-based solution to provide value to a patient and physicians. You could leverage, call it old school AI, but the value for a patient and to the physician and for the healthcare system is quite tremendous. So this is one area in which we are looking to be taking AI in those specific areas that we think can add value to the physician and to the patient.
Looks like the medical device sector measurement and sort of demonstration of value involves a total different convention of assessment as compared to like with pharma. It's a different confounding factors and so on. So now we've kind of gone through like, okay, where are we now and what's our kind of stage. We have another maybe 10 to 15 minutes, so I'm going to do a quick poll with the audience, so just to make sure that they're listening and they're not sleeping after lunch. All right, so poll number 1, just a show of hands. How many of you in your organization is there some form of outcome-based pricing, risk-sharing agreement in whatever kind of work that you do, be it pharma, medtech, startup working in the hospital with your partners, etc. First round of hands that you already have something like an outcome-based agreement in your setup. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and second round of hands is it's something that you're expecting to definitely have in place within the next 12 months. Okay, maybe 1 or 2 hands, not so many. And how many of you are saying that you're still pretty far away from it because of all the challenges that were just mentioned? How many hands go up for that? Okay, there's definitely a lot more hands for that last one. I think we can clearly see. So I think one of the follow-up questions to the audience very quickly is, what is probably your biggest blocker for outcomes deal? Just you can put up your hands as I read out the option. Is it the data in silos? Is that one of your biggest problems that you've faced? Any hands going up for that? Okay, is it the fact that there is a lot of operational workload on the clinicians and the health system? Is that one of the other challenge areas that you typically see? I see a few nods, but you can feel free to put your hand up so our panelists can have a look as well. Okay, and I think that kind of gives us an idea that it's not probably as mature in this part of the world, and there is a few, I would say, leading practitioners who have already kicked it off in this part of the world. So this brings me to the second part, and I think we wanted like a quick view of where would technology. Now we are in the age of AI, value-based healthcare has been there for a long time. I think some of these arguments are not so, we've kind of heard them before. What can technology offer you, or how can you deploy technology differently to perhaps bridge us closer? Maybe not in the immediate present tense, but perhaps in the near future. So I want to start with Dr. Wei Yang. If you could deploy one, let's say, like you said earlier on, maybe Zulka can jump in and help bring all of those data backbone together. A shameless plugin, by the way, guys. Is a deploy that, for example, let's say you had a magic wand that an AI would do whatever you wanted. So in Singapore, what would be your first steps, and where would you stand up outcome-based agreements or a risk-sharing-based agreements? Your 3 priorities or 3 metrics that you would measure, how would you stand that up?
So I mean, I don't know whether there's any very good place. I think one of the key things is probably in areas where you're clearly either having like no cure, or maybe a cure that may work. Like I said, the outcomes are very easy to measure. Then of course the duration of then survivability afterwards, very clearly the value is large, right? So where the value is large, even if there is some error, you can probably measure something that actually makes sense. But of course the challenge is that many times the cost of those drugs are also quite high. So, but I guess in terms of measurement and the ability to measure, that's probably an area that we can kind of think of in terms of deployment. The other thing, of course, is you talk about agentic AI and stuff like that, right? Is there a place for us to do that? I mean, we have been talking about all the different possible ways of thinking about measures of better outcomes. What AI is very good at is actually taking all the jumble of information and then giving you some sort of statement. Now, would we trust that statement? I don't know. But maybe it's a good place to then start to say, okay, maybe the only way to really say, and maybe not to force yes, no, but maybe just to rank order. And then say, okay, this is all the information I have about the individual collected across multiple sources and so on and so forth. How would you rank order outcomes, in some sense, across the different people and so on, and just to get a sense of what might be the ways of thinking of the measurements and the kind of indicators that may actually work. So I wonder whether that's one way of then deploying the AI in a way that actually helps us to solve an issue that we are currently grappling with. Because I feel that in the end, the way that we think about value, right now, it's all quite siloed. Sometimes we may not even know where we should be measuring that value, right? So that's just one area that I thought maybe we could think about in terms of how we could deploy that in a way to help us to maybe help us to reimagine how else we could measure value. Maybe that's one. But the third thing I would then say is that in terms of the measurement of value, one of the things that I've been trying to get the system as a whole to try to build is actually the availability of data across multiple places. But what I do need is every company being willing to then put their data into that ecosystem somehow, right? And of course, then on the government side, maybe all the administrative data that we can have for the individuals as they sort of like live their lives is also somehow available. And that's when the agentic AI or some sort of AI can go in and draw through the data to get a measure of some of these outcomes. And on that basis, maybe some benchmarks can then be determined. I think I like what Ronan said just now about this gold standard. One, then you're like, but the world is not so simple, and you have all this pristine design, and yes, completely supposedly unbiased, except that when it gets out into practice, you know that it's still biased. And then you start thinking, okay, so what are we really trying to achieve? But I think once you say that, let's go into real world evidence, the key is then pharma must also recognize. I also cannot say, oh, this is not relevant, that's not relevant. Everything must then be relevant. And the question is, how do we subject ourselves to that data and make sense of it? We may not be always precise, but hopefully we are mostly accurate in terms of the payments and maybe in terms of how well the drug worked. And maybe even to allow ourselves to say, okay, yes, maybe the guy survived 3 years, not 10 years. There is still some payment that will take place, right? And to just have a bit more grayness, which we would not have been able to contemplate previously, but today we have a much more digitalized health ecosystem, health data, much more diagnostic possibilities, much more sort of like, ability to monitor on an ongoing basis, that we have to imagine a new way of thinking about how we measure these outcomes. So I just feel that that's how we ought to be proceeding. Not necessarily I've offered a solution, but I am trying to set up the conditions that allow us to get there, which is companies must be willing to realize that their data is useless in their own company, but extremely useful when combined with everyone else's data so that everyone can benefit from this.
Absolutely on brand with the ecosystem theme where everybody comes in together. So I absolutely love that. Meaning I'm coming to you with this. So if, again, you had a magic wand and potential challenges that you see, this magic wand could be an AI wand or whatever you wanted to do. What challenges would you see that the modern technology that we have could take us one step further to realizing the promise of value-based care, some outcomes-based, solutions and so on?
So I think I agree with a lot that what is being said, right? Actually, when Roland talked about we can now measure a lot of things, which is very true. That increases even more complexity, isn't it? But I think fundamentally, right, like I think AI, digitalization definitely are tools that enable us to really figure something out. And nowadays, I think in the age of digitalization and the availability of deep tech, it gives us an avenue of if we want to sit down and find a solution, it does look like tech could potentially now be able to support us a little bit more. I mean, in the past, like it's really a black box, right? Like you're not going to spend millions collecting data, trying to sieve through those data. And now actually there is this possibility that, data that sits there, it's possible to actually integrate. It's possible to actually look broader. And I like how we are thinking about it. It's not just about healthcare outcome data. It's linked to productivity. It's linked to, health, social environment. So there is much more bigger picture that you can actually see from the data itself. But what would really enable it is for us to now look at it more comprehensively and sit down and agree on what is our priority and what are actually the outcome that matters for us as a country, right? This is where it's beyond just in healthcare or it's beyond just an individual, right? Like we are in a state where we are really rapidly facing with aging healthcare. Workforce is going to be an issue. Things are becoming very much more expensive here. So there are certain challenges that I think as a country, we can align to in terms of what is the priority. But at the same time, we also need to look at the people side of things. What are the key things that is important? I think for those things to enable, I think my magic wand is that how do we find the right people to sit on the table to align on this set? Then I'm sure actually we have that technology that can help us to do that. I mean, it may not be perfect, I agree, but I think in the larger scale of things, I don't think perfection is what we're looking for, right? It's the openness to then, agree that, yeah, 10, 20% variation, we can always come back and revisit it. But really having the right stakeholders in the room to make that first step forward, I think it's important. So I think that would be the magic wand that
you want. Okay, fantastic. I'm going to come to Dr. Ronan Kelly. Talking about collaboration, having everybody at the table together, having a little bit of skin in the game, if I hear you right, Wei Yang. So how would you say collaboration, because it all right at the upstream of developing evidence with these data, clinical studies, etc. Collaboration, where would you see that? Or how would you, let's say you have the message, the audience here, startups to hospital healthcare systems, how would you like to give them a message about collaboration?
Well, a couple of comments. So first of all, I think there's an absolute explosion of technology companies that allow us to measure more and more things. We now have the technology, I think, to analyze that data, which we could not do even, I think, 10 years ago. Secondly, I think I need two theories with two magic wands. So if I take, I'm being greedy, so ideally, I would like to know what is of value to each individual patient. It's going to be different. No two patients, however similar they seem, are going to have the same perception of value. And annoyingly, even for one patient, it changes from day to day. The other theory would control the system and say that the patient, the patient's family, the GP, the hospital physician, MOH, and Ministry of Finance would all have the same perception of value, because they will all be different as well. From my point of view, in developing drugs, I want to develop valuable drugs. I'd like to know what's valuable. Up to a point at the moment, or historically, what is valuable is what is set by regulators. But going forward, the world is changing. There needs to be a conversation with the health ecosystem, with patients, with patient societies, with very many people about what in each individual case, maybe each individual disease, is valuable. How do we rank, prioritize, value those particular outcomes? Is it longer survival? Is it less pain? Is it better sleep? Is it better sociability? I can't tell you, but we need input so that in developing drugs, we can assess whether they are likely to be valuable to the community if we are to develop them.
I appreciate that. And this kind of sounds in line with what Wei Yang you said in the morning was, so value could change if you stratify the patients correctly. What is invaluable in a larger population with stratification will help. So that's again in line with the precision medicine initiative. So that's perfect. I want to come to Pri, because I think if you, I'll give you the magic wand as well. So if you want to have the magic wand, what would that look like? But I also wanted to understand, because I know a lot of this, the work that you do is also around training the physicians, training, for adoption of devices and so on. So when we move this conversation from products to outcomes, and typically, the commercial teams training the physicians on usage of products to outcome-based. So how would you envision that in the future? Maybe it's not a reality at the moment, but in the future, and with the magic wand, how would you, what would you wish for?
So I'll start with, I think one magic wand is okay. I think the thing that keeps me up at night a lot is maximizing existing value. We have a lot of really good products, and the thing that keeps us up at night is we're not getting enough physicians trained on it. You're just not. And I'll just give you just a simple example. It's just, so I'm just highlighting the folks with prostates in the speakers panel here. By the time we reach 50, two of us have an issue with regard to enlarged prostates. By the time we turn 70, it's 100% of us. Okay. So, so we have a product which basically uses water steam to treat the patient, and it takes about 3 weeks to recover, retain sexual function. It's actually very safe. It takes about 15 minutes to do the procedure. And the issue that we have is we just can't get enough physicians trained. Just can't. Okay? So on Singles Day, 11/11, a couple of years ago, Charles and I, a gentleman there in panel 1, we were experimenting with using digital as a means to treat physicians remotely. So I'll just use this in this case. I was a physician in Adelaide in Australia, and I virtually hopped from one hospital, so 5 hospitals in Malaysia, which have a distance of 700 kilometers, over a period of 3 hours to treat 5 physicians treating 11 patients. Now, in the past, something like this would, the way to think about it is $5 for every $1 worth of value. But in this case, we're able to reverse it. So $1 gives you $5 of value because you're able to do something in digital that physically you just can't do before. Okay? So my magic wand is, can we scale that globally? Because we actually have a lot of great product. We don't need to wait for the next big thing. We can just maximize what you already have. So my advice for folks in the audience is, there's a lot of great product in the by the providers on the panel. Is there a way in which we could expand its reach in APAC, because once you get out of the tier 1 cities, including Singapore, it basically goes down really, really hard from tier 2, tier 3 cities. And yes, we share the same zip code in APAC, in Singapore, but we are usually focused on APAC markets too.
Thanks, Priya. I really appreciate that. I'm going to come to Joachim last now question, but you don't get a magic wand, sorry. But instead you get a regulator point of view to say that, okay, now enough of the magic, now come back to reality. Is now we're selling outcomes, sorry, with all the interoperability, I think, which is the backbone that I think has just been, is everybody saying it in just a different way. There is the cybersecurity angle. I think that's the fundamental risk that comes with, okay, for all these magic ideas to come true, it has to interoperate the data across it. But there's the cybersecurity angle. So sorry, I'm not giving you the magic wand, because I want to hear from you on your, from your APAC Med viewpoint and your expertise there. What are the cybersecurity related elements, trends that everyone in the room needs to be aware of, especially when it's taking forward the data sharing together towards value-based healthcare?
Okay. Yeah, APAC Med has just published a white paper on the topic. So when you go to the APAC Med webpage, you pretty much find what I'm saying right now. So medical technology is producing roughly 30% of the data that is out there today. That's a huge amount. It's unbelievably big. And it obviously creates an opportunity for innovation with all that data. But at the same time, it makes us aware of risks associated with data. And there are two trends that we're seeing in the Asia-Pacific market today. So in market, I mean countries. Obviously, every country acts differently. That's one of the problems in Asia-Pacific. Not one country talks to the other country about the regulations. That's a little bit exaggerated, but it goes into that direction. But we see two trends in the context of the explosion of data and cybersecurity. Number one, we see a tendency for countries to localize data or to send out a demand for the localization of data. That is, in spirit, very nice, protection of data, protection of your citizens, protection of your citizens' health data. But obviously, that is creating a more costly health data ecosystem, because all of a sudden you cannot use cloud solutions, which are very well protected by now. And you don't get access to multi-country health data that you need. Just on a very basic level, for example, to inform or to train an AI system that requires a very diverse population, especially in the field of healthcare. So then following that, in parallel or after that, there's a trend to increase cybersecurity rules over and over again. Singapore is no exception to this, all for good reasons. So these are trends that we see in the market right now that makes the work of connected healthcare, of interoperability within a country and between countries more difficult. The technology to secure data privacy, to secure patient health data is out there, but it's not widely used right now. Cloud-based systems are, I'm not saying they're bulletproof to cyber attacks, but cloud providers provide very, very resilient cloud infrastructure that is probably much better than any physical server that a hospital have in their server room. So we are proposing from an APAC perspective to look into cloud-based solutions as the first attempt of design, considering all the security. Privacy by design, privacy enhancing technologies, they are out there. They would allow the safe transfer of data between stakeholders in the ecosystem. So at the moment, as an industry association, we are seeing what's out there in the market, and we're trying to get in contact with the regulators to make them aware what they are doing from a vendor perspective, obviously very biased, but also reflecting what we see with our partners in the clinical field, what they need. So we're lobbying on our own behalf and on the behalf of our clients. But yeah, this is pretty much it. We need to work with cybersecurity. We have to acknowledge the cybersecurity needs that are out there in the market. but we have to address cybersecurity concerns in a practical, safe, and technology-focused way.
Thank you for that. I think that really sums up all of the conversation, that it is doable, the technology exists, and it's going to take us forward to that step. What I hear, and just to summarize for everyone here, I think one key takeaway from everybody here is, looks like everybody's willing to share their data and get onto a common shared platform. The nitty-gritties of that is what needs to be worked out, where trust comes into play especially. And I think that's where trust links into also cybersecurity, where you have that common sort of environment, or maybe there's a third party that's linking or bridging up. The technology does not seem to be the limiting factor. It looks like technology is there. It's about alignment, the incentives. So if you're approaching the payers, you need some skin in the game to get in there. And if you're working along with the pharma or the medical devices, I think they encourage, I think the team here to come meet the panelists with ideas for how you can measure better, look at more novel digital endpoints while also eliminating the noise. So I think we're lucky sitting in Singapore that we have a good framework that's been set up by the government to actually expound on this innovation here. So thank you so much to the panelists on this panel. We really appreciate your time and inputs through this. Thank you. A big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aparna and panel 2 panelists. Okay, so for those of you wondering, you have the most power star panel for panel 3. So please do stay for our panel 3. Currently, that's going to happen. Yeah. Okay. And before I start panel 3 discussion, so we have this place until 6 p.m. There will be networking tea breaks, right? Some pastries and drinks later on after the end of the conference at 4 o'clock. Right, and the innovation zone will be until 6 o'clock as well. So feel free to stay on and network with the panelists, who most of them are here in the afternoon only. Okay, so without further ado, let me start panel 3 by inviting our panelists on stage. First of all is Associate Professor Daniel Ting, right, from SingHealth. He's multiple roles, right, Daniel? Right, he's the Director of AI Office at SingHealth. He's also SNEC Chief Data Officer, and Daniel is also an innovator. His products is actually outside at the innovation zone. His team is looking after it. Feel free to look at the very interesting smart medication devices, as well as eyesight and many others innovative solutions. Okay, next, can I have our global panelist, right, Mike, who was giving a talk this morning about global collaboration. Mike representing Smart Hospital Alliance in the morning, and in the afternoon, he represents Health on Cloud, that he can share about his entrepreneurial journey. Third, can I have Dr. Pauline Tay, right, from NHIC. She's the director of NHIC, and Chris, right? So I know there are many innovators here. You want to get funding? Look for Pauline. Okay, so stay on, and Pauline will give you the funding and the grant. Okay, fourth panelist, can we have Peter Forbes? Peter, he's the Group Chief Digital Officer of NUHS. So definitely a lot of things that he can share about how you can collaborate with him, right? I know there are many people who want to do clinical trials and different innovations with NUHS. So Peter is the person you can talk to. Last but not least, can I have Dr. Yong Chen Chat? I actually know him as Chat. We worked together in Grab Health many years ago, right? So Chat, my buddy here, right? He's the head of Asia Ecosystem, 22 Health Ventures from US. Now, of course, he's a VC. So again, if you need funding, please pitch to him later on, okay? So thanks, panelists, for joining this very interesting panel 3, which talks about scaling what works in a health ecosystem innovation towards sustainable healthcare. So if you look at it, right, as I mentioned, 2 years ago, when we bring everybody together, we explore how to work in an ecosystem collaboration. And now, right, we definitely want to see what are the successes. They will share some. What are the not so successful cases and what are the lessons learned, right? And most importantly, how to make it sustainable, right? I mean, it's not just about now I collaborate and then That's it, right? So how do you make it sustainable? So maybe I start with Pauline. Don't be surprised. I mean, you are the go after person here. Everybody wants NHIC grant. Okay. Yep. So maybe I start with Pauline, right? You have actually funded many projects from NHIC perspective, right? Are you able to share how many innovations that you have actually given grants to over the past few years, right? Maybe the past 2 years? And then what are the things that you are looking for in providing grant and funding to the innovations? Yeah.
All right, maybe just a little bit about what the NHIC does in case those in the audience don't know. So we actually work with all the public hospital healthcare systems in Singapore in innovation, development, adoption, and commercialization of technologies. So just by that description, I think you kind of know the kinds of projects we look for and what would be some of the outcomes we aim to achieve with the funding that we give out. To your question, how many projects? So we've been around for like 12, 13 years now. So I think the overall portfolio is maybe about 150 projects that we funded, but they range across very early ideation stage to like prototype development. And then of course you can imagine like it's a funnel, right? You have a lot of early ideas in the beginning, but slowly it tapers off to the ones that are sort of like picked for commercial for both clinical and market entry. So you can imagine right at the end, it's a lot less. In the last 2 years, I think we tried out something new. It's a clinical adoption grant, and actually Wei Yang in the audience started it. And of course, in the next 2 years, it was about checking in whether some of these new technologies can indeed be integrated into real-world clinical settings. Now that's really a challenge, right? I mean, we've sort of funded just about 12 projects to try it out. And you can tell, obviously, it's not about the technology anymore. That has all been cleared. They've all received regulatory approval. They've done their trials. Then the question is why? Why is it that some will get selected to be adopted and some will not? And in fact, some amongst just about a quarter of the 12 managed to receive a venture capital funding to even expand beyond Singapore the moment they started doing these projects with the public hospitals in Singapore. So it's kind of telling us something, right? There's critical success factors of those technologies that finally get selected to be implemented and then to scale, right? Not just in Singapore, definitely, it's not a market here, but beyond the shores of Singapore. So I hope that answers your question, you know, whether or not, what are the kind of things we're looking for?
Great, yeah. So now you know, if you want to apply for government grant or NHIC grant, what you should have. It's not just about technology, which I totally agree, right? Which I mentioned in the morning as well. Patient outcome, clinical excellence, operational excellence, these are some of the key factors as well. And you mentioned about after you is VC, right? So I pass on to the VC. Okay. So Mr. VC, sorry. Since the government pushed it to the VC now, no, just joking. Yeah, so Mr. VC, so what are you looking for? What are the X factors, right? I mean, first of all, do you agree with what Pauline mentioned? And what are X factors, especially what are the things that you look for them to scale and how do you bring them to global? Because I know you invest a lot in bringing the Asia startups to US, right?
Hi. Yeah, so Jim, first of all, I think it's a very good question and I'll try to answer it in a way that I think we can understand from at least a framework perspective. So I think to start off with, Pauline and NHIC has been a great partner in terms of the ecosystem, right? So it's no stranger that when I talk about this in this room, we all realize that you can't do it alone, especially in a space like healthcare. So kind of, I'm going to put on the so-called the VC hat and especially thinking about early stage kind of productization, commercialization stage, and then of course aiming towards a go-to-market. So if I were to borrow an adage from the startup world, if you're not building, you have to be selling. If you're not selling, you have to be building, right? So kind of based on this starting point, from an investor's perspective, when you think about the building part, kind of like we think of, I'm going to use a P framework here, right? So you have the people in the startup, the talent, the capability, whether you have in-depth knowledge or the right technical expertise. And of course, we then say, what's the value proposition? Are you a pioneer in the space or are you a me too? Not saying that one is absolutely better than the other, but there are certain strategies that need to align. Okay. And then from a kind of, if you think about the working backwards from the exit, right? We also look at the pace of where the startup is actually growing. Because if you take like 5 years and you're still very early, what is to tell us that the next 5 years will be different or at an accelerated pace? There has to be some signals or indicators or at least the data, right? So first three Ps, the people, the value proposition, and the pace. Now, I think kind of connecting to what Pauline is talking about, especially in terms of why in the end of the day, some gets chosen, to go to the next level. From a execution or the selling side, I would say, we use a different set of Ps. So we think about the provisioning, meaning how are you getting people to pay for what you're offering or what you're selling, right? Is it a reimbursement model? Is it a direct to consumer? Is it out of pocket versus some sort of kind of collaboration of, in terms of where the funding comes from? Next is the productization, right? How do you scale, right? If you're, especially if you're developing a device, there's a hardware component or software component, or if you're developing a therapeutic, how good are you at getting this product into the market, literally into the hands of the user, the consumer? And that's a complex space, right? So procurement, production, which is like, can you scale the costs as you increase in volume? Can you distribute your product? And this whole space even includes the regulatory strategy. How do you enter a market, right? And of course, lastly, I call it the practice. So if you're talking about healthcare, if the clinicians are not willing to accept the innovation, or they have some sort of hesitation, or the fact that they're willing to do a pilot, but there's actually no decision at the end of the pilot, kind of these are the things that we need to answer as part of our due diligence. So just kind of giving you an insight into how we look at early stage startups, even though you can't say that there's a lot of data, but we need to understand the team has already thought of all these areas when they do the pitch. So hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I actually didn't filter their answers because I don't know what they're going to say. But very nicely, your answer talks about scaling, and NHIC and VCs involved a lot in early stage startup. So I'm going to invite the next speaker to share. He's constantly, I would say, involved in startups at different stages, at the very commercial stage, at the very early stage, and also something that is fully production already, right? So Daniel, right? I mean, from the title, it's just Director AI Office Sing Health, right? But Daniel has many, many different roles, play multiple roles, and he can share more. But I want to ask, right? Because some of you probably heard about this company called IRIS from Singapore National Eye Center. It's a very successful commercial, I would say commercialized startups many years ago, and now being sold in EU, in Australia, all over the places. And Daniel is involved in that. And today, Daniel is also just launched Anima Health together with, I don't see Dario, but Ying from Roche Pharma, and also ST Engineering. So again, another very good collaboration case studies for success collaboration. And of course, he's also doing very early stage startup. So I often get the WhatsApp from Daniel at 7 a.m. about new ideas, which is very interesting. So if you ask what keeps me awake, that keeps me awake. Okay. Okay, so Daniel, without further ado, please share your very successful stories about what you have done so far in IRIS, in Anima Health, in some others, very early stage as well. And what are the successful ingredients that you think you can share with the audience here? I think they will be very interested to know. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jim. First, no financial disclosure with what Zulker and what Jim is doing. And success, I think maybe I can share more pain than success, right? So maybe I turn the questions around. So he mentioned about IRIS. I think it was a highly successful academic, the AI projects, and we managed to, get that published in JAMA, which is one of the top medical journals in the world. It's ranked third, I think, based on the latest impact factor. I think coming from the more academic front, what we think as a clinician scientist is always to get our papers to the best journals. I think that's very clear. Anyone who sits in a room who come from either NUHS or NHG or Stanford, Harvard, This is our number one KPI, to get promoted from assistant professor, associate to full professor. I think that's no doubt, right? Then when we talk about innovation, how do you then actually translate the research product or research algorithms to a product, which is what Chad was talking about? In itself, it will kill at least 95% of the research algorithms. And now, when you want to productize it further to become an MVP that is commercially viable, that kills another 95%. So it's left with less than 1% from the original 100%. So I think Iris, to my, how shall I put this? I have a very mixed feeling when I talk about Iris.
I can help you add on later. Yeah,
Maybe if you feed more wine, I will share with you more later.
We will prepare some wine during the tea break.
Off the stage. Okay, coming back to Iris, I think when we started Iris, the world doesn't have this term called SAMD, software as a medical device. This is how early we started a deep learning-based AI algorithms. The world first 3 autonomous AI that is being US FDA approved is AI for DR screening, which is the exact same space that we've done 8 years ago, right? So paper came out 2017, our company got registered 2018, and right now we're still not in the US space as yet. This is the number one problems that I've seen personally in the Singapore startup ecosystem. We have to do better. Okay, that's number one thing that I've learned 8 years ago. If I were to redo what I've done for Iris 8 years ago, I would do it in a completely different way. That's number one. Number two is, how do we actually create success startup? So I got recruited to Stanford about 2.5 years ago. I've seen firsthand how US built startups in the Silicon Valley. That is the epicenter of the tech. Right, you name all the big tech companies out there, or in Seattle, but mostly in SF and California. If we look at the countries that is similar to Singapore, that has extremely lots of success stories about startup. Anyone? Israel, right? Yes, Israel, right? What is their go-to-market strategy? They have exact same numbers of population as per Singapore, but once they build a research prototype, they go US. There is, if you look at 100 startup from Israel, 99% of them goes to US as their go-to-market strategy. At least the one that works, right? One of the very successful example, AirDoc, right? It's a radiological imaging AI company now, is I think in the D or E round already. Valuation about a couple, maybe I think $2 to $3 billion valuations now. That is an imaging AI based startup for radiology. I think those are the things that if we were to actually scale, we talk about scaling, the market entry has to be correct. And when you look at the market you want to go to, either it's China or US, you have to make sure you build a product that will fit into the market. That's what we call product market fit, right? Where do you want to play? Is it SAMD or is it not an SAMD? I think that's a very, very clear space because the approach is very different. Is it B2C or is it B2B? Again, the money that you spend for B2B or B2C is very different, right? So I think those are the very clear lessons that I personally learned in a highly painful manner, right? So I think I would just stop here to actually share the two things between the academic way of building research AI algorithms versus if you were to go across to the startup space, the things that you think of all the time is highly different. One is papers and one is the dollar sign. Yeah, so I'm just gonna stop here. Thanks.
Jim, do you mind if I just add on?
Go ahead,
so
yeah.
that it's, just a little bit of encouraging note for Iris. I mean, it's something that NHIC funded a long time ago. And this is precisely what I mentioned about those that get, how do you choose the technologies that kind of make it right? it was kind of adopted in Singapore. It is chosen for the national eye screening program, but yet it cannot make money in Singapore. Why? Because there's no real market, right? I mean, you look at Singapore, it's so small, and we're so close to our eye specialists, and all of us love our specialists, right? And to be honest with you, a lot of Singaporeans can pay for a specialist. Why would they need a portable eye screening device to, to assess a diabetic retinopathy, right? It's like all the, you cross all the boxes. However, Iris went out of Singapore into countries that were really had like geographical, segregation across, the MENA region, for example, they are affluent enough to pay for a device like Iris Selena Plus, right? But they don't have the benefit of being close to great healthcare, not like Singaporeans. So maybe that kind of market, and I totally agree with Daniel, maybe they should have thought of that right from the start. Would our market actually be MENA, right? And should we work towards that and not waste our time? Because in a sense, they took a long time, right? 8 years. If they had identified that market and went straight for it, they might have become way more successful. But I don't think, it's a learning journey, and I don't think it's really that painful. Just for us to know, right, that there is actually hope and a market beyond Singapore. And that is why we have to continue supporting the early innovations. And even if the clinical researchers only aim for publications, that's where we help them to get to market beyond the clinical evidence. Yep.
Just a disclaimer, Iris is still surviving. I mean, it's not dead yet. But yeah. But I think if you were to grade, Singaporeans love to have A, B, C, D gradings, right? Everyone get graded like at the year end, and we are towards the year end now. If I were to grade Iris, I mean, paper-wise, yes, we are A+. But maybe in startup says maybe a C, close to a B minus. So I think it's not a D or E or F. It's a national pride. I want to say that. Lots of great experience that fast forward 8 years later now, I wouldn't dare to say that I know how to do it best, but at least I could potentially avoid 50% of the things that I would have not done previously that I would do now. Yeah. So just to add on, to support the NHIC back startup.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I interact with people from Thailand, from even Europe, they are actually quite proud and want to find out more about Iris. Some of them heard about that as well. So I'll say that it's a poster boy. I mean, of course, there are a lot of undiscovered or bad experience throughout the entire journey as one of the innovators. And that's where you can get Daniel during the break, right? During networking to understand more so that you avoid making the same mistakes in your own startups. Yeah.
Need good wine though. Yeah, if you were to bribe me. No, I'm just kidding.
We'll get Lorraine to prepare some wine. Okay. Okay, now let's move on to Peter, right? So Daniel is a rare species as an educator, innovator, but yet understand ICT. Okay, but I mean, I deal with a lot of clinicians recent years, right? There's a lot of innovations coming out as well, but many of them, like what Daniel mentioned, focus on writing papers, right? Focusing on maybe just innovations, but without thinking about scaling. Right, as a CDO or CTO, ICT needs, right? How do you actually help the clinicians in achieving something that's more scalable so that it will be more meaningful and higher ROI? Because I understand that you also need to take care of the hospital classes operation. So you need to balance your resource, right? Your resources need to support the day-to-day operations, but yet clinicians come to you and your team to say, can you help me in scaling my innovation and all those things? How do you balance it? And how do you help the clinicians in achieving things that the VCs and the government are looking at?
Yeah, thanks. So, of course, I'm approaching things from an internal perspective. So we're a user of many of these technologies, a consumer of many technologies, and we also develop some of them ourselves as well. And I had written down here in my notes, first of all, pick the right use cases. But to Daniel's point, you need a lot of ideas to get started. So it's not just about picking the right use cases. There's definitely an element of encouraging innovation and having many ideas which can then go through that process of down selection. And we need to keep in mind that those who are looking to trial a technology or developing a technology should not be disheartened if along the way it doesn't succeed. We need many that don't succeed in order to find the ones which do. That said, I think sometimes ideas are born and MVPs or products are conceived and start. But the ops integration part is not covered off. So you can have the most fantastic device or algorithm or application, but if it can't be fitted into the workflow, then it's unlikely to succeed. So, with the use cases that we're now looking at, particularly in the AI space, we're making sure that there's a business sponsor in place who's going to help drive it through, that there's a project lead who's going to be the arms and legs and drive it, that there's a clinical lead that makes sure that it fits within all the clinical protocols, etc., and that there's a technology lead also. So you actually need quite a sizable team around something in order to help it succeed. Then, of course, there needs to be a good framework in place to take the idea through step by step. So whether it's at the early stage, make it clear what they should be trying to achieve, or as it gets closer, then helping it across the end line. And in doing that, it also, encourage, back to this point around ops tech integration, encourage the 70-20-10 rule. So 70% of the effort needs to go into the change management and the integration into the operations workflow. 20% of the effort goes into the technology and the data, and maybe 10% into the algorithm. So not diminishing, of course, that the technology is important, but it's really getting it into the workflow and processes, which is going to help it to succeed. And that applies, again, whether it's an internal thing, which has been developed internally, or whether it's a product which is coming in from a partner, which we want to try out in the healthcare system and then take it through into implementation.
Great, thanks. So yeah, definitely you will be very helpful to help clinicians to look at how to help them scale, right? So now move on to Mike, right, from a global perspective, because you share about global collaboration this morning already, right? And you hear all the pains that Daniel just shared about being local and not being in the epicenter of Silicon Valley, right? I know you work in Latin America, in US, in Korea, in Europe. So how is it different in those countries? Is culture playing a part, or is it some other things that actually do a different collaboration in a global scene?
I would say is definitely culture, 100%, but also accessibility and infrastructure, right? What's available for you. I love Singapore because things happen here so fast. I'll give you an unrelated example, but if I'm going to register IP, I have to go to one office, right? That won't happen in other countries. You have to go to like 10. So productivity is slowed, but also Singapore has a similar mentality to Korea where they want to be world's first. There's a little bit of that here. You want to bring it to market first, prove it, and that's a really, really good thing, right? And culture encourages that. But then you have other countries where they just don't have infrastructure. So it won't be culture, I'll go with infrastructure. I do a lot of work in Latin America and Mexico. I meet the most passionate people that are trying to develop their product, but the VCs don't have much money because there's not a lot of money in the hospitals. Nurses don't get paid much. The doctors don't get paid much. People really need healthcare, but it's really hard. So is that culture? Is that infrastructure? A little bit of A, a little bit of B, right? And then you'll go to the UK where tradition rules and things are very slow from my experience because you have to meet with so many stakeholders in order to make something happen, right? Or you could look at a UX UI. You go to China and go to Korea and go to America and go to Singapore, everyone's preferences are completely different. When I came over, I lived in Korea 18 years. When I first moved over, I was culture shock. Oh yeah, just TV commercials, you know what I mean? UX, UI, how we interact, how people treat hospitals, the wait time, and Korea is really fast. You can get a hospital or clinic anywhere, but yet they're really determined to create digital to make it better. Same as Singapore. But then yet you go to emerging country and digital is very slow. They don't even have EMRs, but again, it's because of lack of resource and infrastructure. So culture definitely is a very big issue, and having the support staff and funding and having everything that we've discussed, I think it's very important. That makes Singapore special. What I will say for all of the companies here, I think most of the digital technology we're working on, we're discussing, is very applicable in those countries. I think they need it more. So I'm doing a couple of projects now with some governments in Colombia. And one of the pilots is they want to use AI to not treat the patient, to give an alert, because patients are coming to the hub hospitals too late. So they're getting cancer, right? And they don't know until they're stage 3. But at their local hospital, this is the funny thing. They technically, for example, they're covered under health insurance in Colombia. 95% are covered if there's infrastructure to validate and allow you to claim for that. But a lot of these rural communities, they don't have the infrastructure to get what they're actually entitled to. So we're working on one pilot, for example, where they want to incorporate drones for sending pharmaceutical supplies. And then at the rural hospital, it's easier to train a technician to use an AI program than it is to actually get a doctor to go live in that community where they're not going to have any money or infrastructure. So imagine if you can have like a little digital workspace where patients can go and there's a technician to support the GP. You can use telehealth. You can fly resources in, and then you got to go to the hospital and you can get it covered. That's amazing. And that's what technology can do. And that could be some of the payers versus a very developed country where the workflow is very minimal. It's like a 7-Eleven. There's only a little bit of shelf space, right? And I can only take A, B, or C, or D because I can't really fit it in. So it's got to be really good. And I need a lot of champions from the hospital behind it saying, yes, we need this. And I need the government go, yes, we're going to cover this. And that's a win-win-win story. But that's a storybook for a lot. However, there is a big frontier outside. And I think a lot of people, if they could open up on the collaboration theme, you can see a lot more companies succeed.
Thanks, Mike. Yep. So culture is definitely one of it. And you mentioned cancer, right? You wouldn't want to be at stage 3 of cancer, then you detect. So just promote a little bit. You have Gene Solution over there from Vietnam, right? They actually do early detection of cancer, and they work with people like Dr. Anywhere and Raffles Medical for part of the health package offering. Yep. So thanks for that. And to the audience, I know you have been listening for the whole day, right? You may want to talk. So please prepare a question. I'll open the floor to the audience afterwards, right, for your 2 questions. So whoever raised fastest fastest hand first. Okay. So now let's go to the next part, right? So prepare your question. Next part is we hear a lot about the ingredients and the X factors to be successful and to scale, and how CDO or IT organization can help. So what do you think? I mean, it's open to all panelists, right? What do you think are the barriers to scalability to ecosystem innovation? I mean, is it culture? Is it change processes, change management, people, or is it regulatory constraints, which many of them talk to me about, right? Anyone wants to take it? Okay, Pauline, point to you. Yeah.
I've got 4 points.
I'm sure Peter and I from SingHealth share the same pain, but
okay, let's see if NUHS and SingHealth have the same pain. So Peter starts first.
I guess this is where we should start complaining about things like cybersecurity, tight rules, and all these sorts of things. Honestly, though, I mean, those things are going to be there and will be there in other industries as well. I feel it's more about knowing how to navigate and find a way through. And in part, one of the things that that we're looking is that to build experience within the organization. So there's not a lot of people who have that end-to-end experience of taking IT solution through from start to finish, through the full product life cycle. And they can get stuck in many different areas. They can get stuck on procurement, they can get stuck on cyber, they can get stuck on getting it through architecture review board, etc. So getting more people who that end-to-end is going to help. And the regulations, etc., will always be there. If anything, they're not going to get any looser, going to get tighter. So I think it's more about building that experience within the organization. At the early stages, taking an MVP type approach, making sure that there's product market fit, which also applies to internal solutions. When you're innovating, you want to find something which can impact a sufficiently large population such that it's going to be worth investing in. And going back to my point previously, that there is someone in the organization who's going to be willing to buy it, because at the end, even if it's an internally developed solution, someone's still got to pay for it. It's got to go through into EAU, and it gets charged out to somebody on a TPT to the institution or the department. And then finally, to talk about integration challenges, I think everyone wants to integrate into the medical record system. Not everything can be integrated into the medical record system. So prioritizing and finding the right ones there, and then for the other ones, finding some other way in which to do it.
Great, thanks. Right, integration is always something I hear from many conferences. I mean, people have a hard time knowing how to integrate with public health systems in Singapore, right? Although we are quite centralized. Daniel, you have anything to share from SingHealth perspective?
Well, maybe I take another slightly different approach to response to your questions. The barriers is, if you know how to navigate the barriers, you could potentially turn it into opportunities, right? So I think this is something that is a double-edged sword. When we talk about adoption, that is the valley of death that many people are talking about. How do we do that? And if we look at, of course, from the public health standpoint, we want to be altruistic and we want to serve social, public good. But at the end of the day, you cannot run away from the dollar signs. So let me explain a bit more. Values. The previous conversation with the farmers, the senior leadership talk about who pays and who gains. And today in life, if you can figure out that question, the adoption rate would increase by 99%. So just imagine that if you're the CFO of SingHealth and NUHS, you are currently looking at whether or not I need to use a certain AI algorithms. And today, if your proposal can make the CFO think that, hey, it's either I'm going to generate the revenues or either I'm going to cut costs to still get the net profit. So profitability, whether you're going to be from the public health or private health, from pharma and many startups, is the same. It's just that from a public health standpoint, we are not here to make money, but doesn't mean that we do not need to make profit. So where does the profit come from? The profit has to come from cost efficiencies to cut manpowers or like the unnecessary wastages. I think that's one big part. If any startup can figure out how to help public health standpoint to do that, they will be more willing to do that. But of course, in order for you to do that, then you have to think. Your approach in the technological settings, it has to be the EMR first approach. Meaning that whatever solutions that you're building in the AI or digital space, if someone asks you, do you know what EMR system does this hospital use? And your short answer is no, you're set to fail. So if you come to Singapore in 2-3 years' time and say, hey, I have these solutions that is groundbreaking, published in Nature. And when people say, do you know Epic? And you say no, that's it, right? Game over. Same thing for, the IT infrastructure and the management team. So those are the two big questions. If one can grasp it well, what is the EMR system and who maintains the IT system, right? So if you go to Peter in NUHN and say, hey, Peter, I have these groundbreaking AI solutions that works with Epic, but you have to spend 10 people to help me to do this, and still I have to charge you. Sorry, the short answer is no, because you are getting Peter to carve aside 10 men to help you to integrate this into the system. So I think those are the two key questions. I'm just not going to beat around the bush, and I'm going to mention all the key points that if you can think of all these salient points well at the outset, at least you still stand a chance to become the 1% startup that's survived in 5 years' time, right? We haven't even talked about how to scale, how to employ a full team of full stacks engineers. Is it onshore? Is it offshore? Is it in cloud? I haven't even talked about that yet. I'm just saying that if you haven't thought about the two questions that I just mentioned, please don't do your startup because it was set to fail. So I think those are the very the critical the question that I always advise any startups, any AI researchers, developers who come to my office. This is the two things you have to think a little. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. Yep. So I think he already shared a lot before his wine. Yeah. Okay.
It's a teaser.
The
So I
teaser,
get
okay.
better
Wow,
wine.
definitely people need to catch you with wine later. Anyone from the audience want to ask a question? I'm only opening 2 questions. Shy, or you want to catch over wine and drinks? Okay, now then let's move on, right? So, I mean, I always like to use this quote, and it was in my white paper as well, quoting Minister Ong Ye Kung, right? I think about 1.5 years ago at a CHI event, he talked about which industry has the most number of pilots. I guess. You know pilots, right? The one who fly the plane. Yeah, so it's not aviation industry, but healthcare industry, right? I don't know whether you have the statistics, but that's what he said, right? And it was very thought-provoking to me, right? I mean, there are so many innovations, and then the scalability was one of the challenges. But of course, just now we share about how to make it more scalable and what the guarantor and the VCs are looking for. So maybe I back to Daniel again, right? So now that you play different roles, we know that, and then you already share about barriers and also lessons learned, right? How to make something scalable, right? Because there's already innovations and you have success stories already. How to make something scalable from your perspective and to share with the audience.
So again, I go back to the principle, right? Scalability is that you don't want to do one to get one in return. That is not scalable. So you want to build one to serve 10, or you want to build one to serve 100 or beyond. So in the AI and the tech space, this is something that we constantly think about. How do you build from a product to a SaaS model to a PaaS model? So if you look at Apple as a very good example, how do you actually go from building a computer to sell to B2C versus building an app stores and then making that a marketplace for people to actually start selling app and you charging indirect. So those are the software as a service play, the SaaS model to a PaaS play. All the big unicorns, if you look worldwide, they are all in this trajectory. So if you were to actually do your pitch, you were to do your financial projections in your startup, you have to constantly think about these different models. So for me, if I were to think about scalability, a SaaS and a PaaS model is usually scalable, but of course it comes with a lot of the different challenges. We can talk about it later, yeah.
Great, thanks Daniel for that. And now we move to mine, right? Now that we understand what makes things scalable, who should fund it? Because you have smart hospitalized, you have health and cloud, you work with so many different players. Who should be funding it?
Okay, so I think it's not about funding in the such of money. It's about who's the funding coming from. Okay, so right now we're working a lot in Latin America with IDB, which is a World Bank. And then we're working with a lot of hospitals that are not per se giving money, but they're part of alliance where they're giving their time. Now that time is super valuable because if a pharmaceutical paid for it, it'd be a fortune, right? Or a medical device company when you're working on some of these areas. So there's good money and bad money, okay? This is the way I always look for VCs. When I was younger and I did a startup, I got what we call bad money, and they took years off my life because they would call me, weren't very supportive. They weren't doing the intros. They weren't helping me along the path. And if you have those people, when you pick that funding, that is going to be huge, right? From a government level, the interested government agencies, you get to the Secretary of Health's office, you get to those doctors when you're building, for example, a lot of tech companies build from their heart, but no, ask the doctors, would you use this? Will this fit in my workflow? Is a question that most people don't ask that you should. I learned that from bad experience. We had to scrap it and we had to rebuild because it's like, it looks fancy, it's great, but they don't really see it going in their workflow. So Government, yes, this is always good. You can always probably find a research grants. And for the VCs, they want to know that you have those doctors, you have those connections so you can actually bring it to market, or maybe you find a VC that can help introduce you to those markets. There's a lot of things you have to consider. So I think when it comes to funding, doesn't matter how much, it matters who is going to help you reach your goal. And if your goal is this, and I want to get to this, you really got to look at all levels and then get the funding from there, and then it just kind of grow. But I hope that answers your question, because I don't think there's an amount of money you can put on something. I could have $10 billion and I could have $1 million, but if I have the right infrastructure, that million, I'm probably going to be way bigger than that 10, right? Because it's like your bank account when you're first working. When you have $100, oh, it lasted a month. Then you're making 10,000. Oh, it lasted a month. It's really about what's accessible and the choices you make.
Sure. Since you talk about government funding, so I go to Pauline. Right. So, I mean, definitely you mentioned, and we know that most of the government grants fund early innovations, right? Doesn't really fund scaling. And we always expect VC. So, Chad, you know you're next, right? You don't really fund a lot of scaling, right? So there's this thing, what we call valley of death, right? In the gap of funding, because before some innovators get the early funding, they need to scale, right? Before they can commercialize, partners, they need some money. But where do they find the money apart from VC? So how do you see national health bodies like yourself, national agency like yourself, help in this addressing the value of gaps, right? And what are the options they can look for? Yeah.
Okay, Jim, I'm mindful that you started off your question with pilotitis, right? Like there's way too many pilots that don't actually get finally adopted, like real world adoption. So I think I do agree with Mike, right? It's not just about the money and the quantum. You've also got to think about the stage of the development, because money comes in different ways, right? And I think one of the things that I've tried to run a startup before, and we work with lots of startups. And then I realized the key question is you've got to build something that someone would buy. You always have to begin with the end in mind, right? What is that thing? Is it a product? Is it a service? Is it a package solution that someone is prepared to put money on the table for you? Now, the journey obviously for health technologies is really, really long, right? You start off possibly trying to apply for a grant to convert a research idea into a prototype, right? That is probably going to be like a government type grant or maybe philanthropic funding. But then as you move along the innovation continuum, and this is where I'm going to save Chad, because I don't think VCs fund for scaling. They also fund for, so why would a VC pay you money or invest in your startup? It's because eventually they also want to make money, right? So if your customer is a VC, you got to think about what does he or she want from giving you money. There's no free money in the world, right? If they give you money, they probably want to exit at some point and make, I don't know, 10x, 25x. It's blinking. Okay, but so at that point, your customer is a financial person who hopes to make money. All right, so if you don't think about his or her end in mind, you're going to get money like Mike did, where people, will just keep calling you and say, when am I going to exit? Where's your product? Who's buying it? Where's your revenue? Right, and then you're correct. And then you're going to be stuck in the next valley of death, right? Because if you didn't think about building that solution that someone eventually would buy and pay for, you will always be stuck, right? Then, of course, end in mind, if you're building a health technology that a hospital or a patient or maybe a government would pay for, then you've got to think about where's that money coming from? Same thing, right? Always think about who is your customer. Health technology is no different from anything else like water or any product that you're building. It is the same. Who would give you that money? Now, if it's government, then you really got to think about which country it is that you're going to. In the US, it's very clear. There's a CPT code for everything, if it's reimbursable or not. Whether people can claim insurance is very clear. So don't go out the alley where there isn't a clear, transparent CPT code or reimbursement pathway, right? In Singapore, unfortunately, it is a little bit more of a black box, but it's not invisible. You can ask questions and figure that out, right? It's the same thing, because whether or not a hospital is willing to pay for you out of their own budget, right? Where would they get that money from? It's either they charge it to the patients, or they get subvention or subsidies from the government. So that's where the previous panel about cost effectiveness comes in, right? Who would pay for that? Now, governments of the world would only pay for it if there is very significant cost effectiveness, like what we call value-based care, right? It's a very unfortunate thing, but it's utilitarian, right? It's not as if they're going to give you like $1 million if it can only save like one person, or that person could be a little bit older or a bit younger, but they have this way of calculating quality, right? Oh my God, okay. I think that means I should stop talking.
We are safe, don't worry.
So yeah, I think our lives are more important than who's going to pay for the health technology. Okay, but you get my drift, right? So end of the day,
don't be too angry. Activated the fire alarm. What's going on?
You think so? Yeah, so again, right, there's always that who will pay for it and where do they get the money. That's really important.
Oh, good, we are safe. Yeah. She looks after patients.
I think it's all Pauline.
Yeah.
Pauline,
That must be me,
calm
man.
down, calm down.
It means that we have to go for wine now, right? Okay, yeah, I hope that answers the question. Like, end of the day, it's not about how much. It's definitely you need the money, but you have to build something that someone is willing to buy.
Sure. So I don't think we get full answers of who is paying. Of course, hospitals and others, value-based care, right? So maybe go to chat, right? Because apart from being VC, 22 Health Ventures also mentor, right? Give training programs to the innovative companies as well, like under NUS School of Medicine data program. So can you share what are the anecdotes you share with the different startups on making sure you can find your payers, right? Who is going to pay for your innovation, especially for scaling, because VCs and government fund for only the before scaling stage. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of approach this from two angles. I think one is for the startups, and I think the other is about understanding the VCs as well. So I'll explain what I'm going to say, right? So when you are running a startup, it's honestly a very challenging and ever-evolving situation. You never like just one thing, and you're never able to say that I've got really good at this and I'm going to stick to this. So you realize that, especially for us in the healthcare, from the clinical space, and maybe even from the academic space, we pride ourselves in building a deep expertise in the fields that we are strong in, right? And for us to kind of pivot or to actually open ourselves to actually learning something new, sometimes I've heard someone tell me that this is going to be an opportunity cost. So I just want to bring out this term where I think, especially in the Singapore system, we all have this opportunity cost equation in our mind, whether we say it or not, because whatever we invest in something, there's an expectation, not just for ourselves, but for the people who are around us or the people who support us, that there has to be a return of the investment. So this is where the efficiency of Singapore sometimes can be a double-edged sword, right? So when you are kind of creating a startup, you're building a product, you're developing, you're commercializing, and you're trying to raise money, right? The focus at each different stage is actually quite different. That means if you're raising pre-seed, seed money, and then you start to go into like a Series A, and especially when you are literally going to have a talk with a growth stage VC, which is like a Series B or post B or C, what they actually look out for is very different. So the capabilities you have, the strategies, the way you go to market, the speed at you, the way you go about, and your ability to actually reinvent yourself and convert from like a product to a platform, I think to Daniel's comment, right, will become important at different stages. And sometimes what will be very hard from a mentorship to a founder perspective is they have to admit that they're not the best person to do that part, right? So that kind of confidence in yourself to actually withdraw yourself from the leadership position also comes to play. And it's not easy. I can tell you that it's very hard. On the other side, something that for me, when I do my mentorship, I actually make it a point to educate or to share that not all VCs are the same. It's like in the medical world, a oncologist versus a radiation oncologist versus a radiologist. all sound similar, and you would think that they focus on cancer, which is the practice area, but they all come from a different approach in terms of how they think and solve for things, right? So from VC perspective as well, you have all the different types of VC funds. They all have different kind of tenures. And when you meet a fund, let's say in the first 3 years when they are raising and deploying, or when you're meeting someone which is kind of 3 to 5 years, where the expectation is to go for an exit, the behavior and the expectation is very different, right? And also nowadays, I think in the VC industry, we ourselves are trying to innovate. So you have, mixture of venture builders becoming like hybrid VCs, or VCs trying to be venture builders, building their own companies. And of course, you have, depending on whether your LP, which is where you get your fund money from, is it like a single LP CVC, or you are actually raising money from a group of family offices, which has different strategies, different focus. And in a way, the fund managers, which is a VC, has to kind of also answer to that. So once you understand like this whole web of ecosystem, right? And already healthcare is a complex web to start off with. Fundraising is the other web. How do you synchronize? How do you evolve? So I think for me, the answer is you need to also know that the fundraising space, or the world of fundraising, is a unique world itself, as unique and as nuanced as the healthcare space. So that makes it tough for them.
Jim, can I clarify? Because before the fire alarm came on,
This is truly a fireside chat for once.
because you said government only funds like before scaling. Actually, that's not true. I mean, I was
Okay.
trying to say that actually later near the end, right, when a technology is chosen for like mainstreaming, and that's when they do their calculations on whether or not they would subvent something. They're a huge funder, right? In governments of the world, they fund like drug price lists and things like that, right? People get subsidies for using certain new innovative interventions. So yeah, I mean, it's just that perhaps digital health is so new, like people are still figuring out, right, in the world, if they brought in an AI, would it be subventable, subsidizable? Chad, you want to add to it?
So I think really knowing the market you're in, I think going back to Daniel's comment, is very important, because it's not just what you're building for or what you're selling into, but where you're raising from, or raising using the market as a reference. All that really matters, right? Like valuations for the same product or IP can be grossly different depending on what geography you are already operating in, or what geography you're raising money from, right? So all this really matters. Yeah.
Maybe questions to Chad, since you mentioned my name so many times. What do you see? We talk about culture, and there is also an investment culture. What do you see the main difference between how the Asian VCs putting the first dollar versus how US counterparts would do versus how the Chinese counterpart would do? Maybe you can share some of your experience here.
So kind of my observation is that the maturity of VC investing, and I say it as a self-criticism as well, is not very mature and not very deep in this part of the world. We are actually quite behind versus like the US, right? Now, capital structure and source of funds is one thing, but if you think about, well, the nature of the industry, healthcare in the US is very capital driven, it's kind of privatized, it has its own problems, but it creates the own opportunity. So we call that the depth of innovation, and the breadth of funding is a lot higher. And in a sense, if you mentioned, I think a few times, they use dollar signs to drive decisions, good and bad, but the good is that decisions get made based on at least a referenceable kind of approach. Here in Asia, and I'm not saying this is wrong, in Asia, the healthcare kind of industry is slightly different, because it's mostly public sector, it's for impact, it's for basic national kind of serving the people and things like that. So we don't make profitability the front and center of healthcare, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, right? Please don't misquote me. But it actually creates a different kind of opportunity when it comes to investments. So if you are a global VC, right, when you look at these two opportunities, you actually have to deploy different approaches. And from a historical perspective, from an exit opportunity as well. I mean, no surprise here, I will say that towards the West, there's always been the higher chance, the higher valuations of return on investment. It is what it is. Healthcare on this side of the world is mostly still a private equity play for anyone in the audience who's from the PE side, is because they focus on mature and operational businesses with profits already in the books, right? Versus VCs, you are kind of investing in potential and future profits. So it's a very different capital approach. So I think that's kind of my answer to what you're asking.
Could I jump
Yeah.
in there? Okay. So from my experience from the US, so I used to work in Palo Alto for a little bit, and it was at the Playground, which was the founder, Andy Rubin, he opened up this big incubator. One little bit of difference was investing in tech became trendy. And what I mean is you had all of the athletes, the basketball stars, the NFL stars, fire alarms, but they
I think
would,
it's heating up again.
It must be me. But they would all start coming and they would have like treks of people coming in with money. Not like you here when I started coming over into Korea, for example, Singapore, it's not that level of interest, right? There's not like a bus of really rich people rocking up going, I have money, I want to invest. That's a big thing. But I think it's because they got known, right? It was the movies. It was the way they promoted Tech Valley. It became cool. You literally have UK folks going over there. You have Europe. You have Asia. Everybody moved in because it became like a trend to find good tech. And then they were paying good money. Then you took all the really good developers, and they all want to go to work for Google or Apple. They all up in Palo Alto. What I'm trying to say is it starts with culture, and I think it starts with how you entice it. There's a ton of really, really rich people in Asia, but on the VC side, like, you know what I mean? The more success you get and the more markets you open up and the way you market it, I think that could make a big impact too. I've just noticed that. Like, I've never seen so many investors, I'll let it be like sitting down at lunch and be like, oh, there goes $1 billion, there's another $1 billion, there's another $1 billion. And they're just investing because they have a lot of money to invest, and that's kind of common, yeah?
Sorry, I just want to share something I think is important, right? There is a concept of to achieve success is a journey where not having success all the time is okay. I think we're still not there over here because for us, when we do anything, success is the objective. There's no other alternative. So I think that also has an impact onto both sides, the startups as well as the investors that operate from viewplay. So go back to opportunity cost, right? Yeah.
So the reason why I asked that questions is because the startups here and the approach when you pitch is very important. In US, people put the first buck based on your people and your tech stacks. You don't actually have to be revenue generating for them to put the first $1 million, right? For the below $10 million. And sometimes if you're a ex-Google senior executive and, you know, like Fei Li and, you know, the CTO from OpenAI, Miro, the new startup, you can raise a $10 million to actually build the company based on the concept. But in Asia, I think if we were to actually, go to pitch, I think this is where you would need to start looking at, people will ask you whether you're value generating or not. If you're not, then more often than not, you either end up with Enterprise Singapore grant and multiple grants later. You're still trying to generate your first dollar, which is a lot of the portfolio companies I've already seen. 3 years down the track, multiple millions of government funding and still not revenue generating. I think that's one. And that's a double-edged sword for Singapore ecosystem. We are very protective, we're very supportive, but sometimes we are just not, disciplined enough to cut it loose at the appropriate time. I think that's one. The second thing is that if you have a very brilliant idea and you find that there's no one in Singapore space is actually trusting you, I would strongly encourage you to go out from Singapore first. Because even though this is your home, sometimes if the maturity or like the readiness is not there, don't force the ecosystem to take your ideas. Be nimble enough to get out, and then at the appropriate time frame, and Singapore is always FOMO. When you create a big name outside and when you want to come back, people will actually be fighting to get onto the investment round. So I think those are the two lessons also I personally have seen for the last few years that things has kind of worked towards that path. Last thing I want to say is that in AI and digital health, there is a very different approach between a software as a medical device and a software as a non-medical device. Because when you start raising fund, you need to know what the fund is used for. For example, SAMD, if you were to raise fund in US, the fund is supposed for you to do prospective clinical trial, multi-center trial to get US FDA regulations. That's the way that how the VC, the world actually will view how appropriately are you using your fund. Whereas in Asia, maybe the SAMD side, maybe like what Pauline said, maybe is not as strict, is probably looser. So maybe you don't actually need a prospective clinical trial. Then the fund that you pitch for has to make sense. Or are you building more products? Are you doing more B2C or B2B? So those are the different ways that you need to actually kind of think about when you start actually prepare your pitch deck. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So I hear that fire alarm is triggered again. Maybe that's a sign that we should end this panel very soon. Okay, and 45 minutes already passed by. So maybe just one last concluding remarks from every panelist, right? So 30 seconds each to 1 minute, right? If there's one obstacle you can remove, right, to make innovation more scalable, right? What will it be? And what is the one advice that you give to innovators to not fall into the valley of death in terms of pilot graveyard? Yeah, Shah, you want to start first? Do we move around just like this? Yeah.
I think for me is, believe it or not, we have many different parties all involved, and they're all very helpful and doing their best. But sometimes having too many people, too many parties, and non-focus, it dilutes the decision making. That means you need to get a lot of consensus. I think somewhere in the middle is the best way, meaning, yes, there's options, but I think there needs to be a focused decision-making capability where we can drive something through and everyone align. Yeah, so that's kind of my comment about ecosystem. Yeah.
Sure. Peter?
I think the key thing again is, going back to the workflow integration and early on for the innovators to go and engage with the end customer. Make sure that there's someone there who's willing to buy and that they're willing to put it into their workflow integration, whether it's clinical or whether it's operations. And if that can be done, then that's a big hurdle over.
Thanks, Pauline.
I think for me, it's like 3 Ps: process, procurement, payment. I wouldn't wish them away, but I wish there's more transparency in all of it.
Mike?
Yeah, I would say you remove one thing, it'd be borders. I think, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes maybe the timing is wrong. Maybe it's better here and you can bring it back. Don't let a good idea fizzle and see yourself 10 years later going, oh, which a lot of people do, right? I had that idea, but they let it go. You don't always have to do in your ecosystem. Expand out, bring it back, but think global. I think that's the beautiful thing about digital. It's not like a big medical device. You know what I mean? Where it was different when you were making like an MRI. It's this massive, expensive, burden. Now it could be little tiny device and you can scan, right? So yeah.
Thanks, Daniel.
I hate to keep saying the dollar signs, but I'm still going to end my talk with ROIs, right? Return on investment. Whether your return on investment come from revenue generating or cost savings, you have to think for the people that you are trying to pitch your projects to, so that once you can help them to solve the problem, they will start buying your solutions. So I think that is something that I want to share. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. So with that, we conclude the panel 3, right? Hope that you get some anecdotes on what actually works in scaling, right? And feel free to interact with the panelists. So can I invite all panelists, we take a group photo together? Yeah.
Thank you, Jim, for a great moderation.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, panelists. Please have your seats. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Careful, be careful. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so with that, really thank you, especially all the audience here who stay with us throughout the whole day, right? This is the end of today's session, right? So conclusion, I mean, you definitely hear a lot and watch out for our social media posts, right? So hopefully throughout this event, you have heard from the different players, right? Different presenters and panelists, what really works, right? How will AI be useful in the health ecosystem scene, and who actually pays, who actually gains from the entire health ecosystem. And in the morning, we have seen from Singapore to the region in APAC and to global collaboration, right? So last but not least, please do a scan of this QR code to give us feedback, right? And at the same time, as I mentioned just now, we have this place until 6 p.m. The innovation zones are still there. There's tea break outside there. Don't waste the food, right? Visit the innovation zones. Two here, Gene Solution, Early Detection of Cancer, Health on Cloud and Smart Hospital Alliance, where you can bring globally your collaborations. SingHealth, AWS, Microsoft, Zebra, EXA are there on the right-hand side. NUS School of Medicine, they are not just startups. Some of them are already at the late stage, right? And very innovative solutions, 9 companies there that you can watch out for. So ecosystem collaboration is not just about presentation and panel discussion. It's actually about networking, and this is the time that you can actually look for collaboration. So with that, I actually declare the closure of this year Health Ecosystem Day. Thank you for coming again. We'll see you 2 years later in HED 2027. Thank you very much. Thank you. The food is at the same lunch area. You can get it and you can walk around. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, thanks, Chad.
No. We've met before. Yes. Almost certainly. Okay.